45 stories. That is what we are going to walk through together today. 45 stories that Jesus of Nazareth told to ordinary people standing in fields and on hillsides and in borrowed boats pushed just off the shore. Not 45 sermons, not 45 doctrines, not 45 theological propositions arranged in careful order for the benefit of the educated. 45 stories, most of them short enough to tell in the time it takes to walk from one end of a village to the other, and every single one of them built out of the most ordinary material imaginable. Stop and consider what that number actually means. Depending on how you count them, depending on whether you classify a brief comparison as a full parable or only as a figure of speech, scholars have arrived at numbers ranging from around 30 to well over 60. But somewhere in the middle of that range sits a solid, undeniable core of roughly 45 stories that the Gospels preserve for us in the mouth of Jesus. And here is what should stop you in your tracks. That handful of stories represent something close to a third of everything Jesus is recorded to have said. A third, not a footnote to his teaching, not the illustrations he sprinkled in to keep the crowd awake between the serious parts. The stories were the serious part. The Son of God, given a limited number of years and a limited number of words, chose to spend an enormous portion of them telling stories about farmers and coins and bread dough and wedding parties and a man who got beaten up on a road. You could read all 45 of them aloud in about 90 minutes. And you could spend the rest of your life failing to reach the bottom of them. Now notice something else about the number, something that most people never notice until it is pointed out to them, and then they cannot stop noticing it. Out of those 45 stories, how many are set in heaven? How many describe the mechanics of the afterlife, the architecture of eternity, the ranks of the angels, the details of the world to come? Almost none. Jesus had every right to describe realities that no human being had ever seen. He had, in fact, more right to do so than anyone who has ever lived. And instead he talked about seed, about yeast, about a woman on her hands and knees at night sweeping a dirt floor looking for a single lost coin, about a man who built a barn, about a shepherd counting sheep and coming up one short, about day laborers standing in a marketplace hoping somebody would hire them before the sun went down. 45 windows, and every one of them opens onto the same street you walked down this morning. That is the promise of this study, and I want to say it plainly before we go one step further, so that you know exactly what you are being invited into. By the time we reach the end of these 45 stories, you will not look at your ordinary life the same way again. Because the whole point of a parable, the reason Jesus chose this particular form over every other form available to him, is that a parable takes the world you already live in and shows you that it has been shot through all along with the presence and the purposes of God. The bread rising on your counter, the money in your account, the person you passed on the road and did not stop for, the son who has not called, the work you did today that nobody noticed, the waiting you are doing right now for something that has not come yet. All of it, according to these 45 stories, is closer to the kingdom of God than you have ever imagined. This is not a video about religious history, though history runs through every one of these stories, and we will stop often to understand the world they came out of. The farming, the currency, the customs, the wedding traditions, the legal realities, the shocking cultural assumptions that Jesus deliberately overturned in front of his listeners. This is not a lecture in the dry academic sense, though there is real study here, and we're not going to shy away from the original languages or the difficult passages. This is an encounter. A long, unhurried, deeply personal walk through 45 stories told by the one person in human history whose stories are still doing their work 2,000 years after he stopped speaking. And we are not going to rush. We are not going to skim these and hand you a tidy summary of what each one means so that you can check them off a list. Parables do not work that way. They were never designed to be summarized. A parable is not a package with a meaning inside it that you extract and then throw away the wrapper. A parable is a living thing that goes into you and stays there and keeps speaking to you at different depths for the rest of your life. You are going to hear stories today that you have known since childhood: the prodigal son, the good Samaritan, the lost sheep. And I want you to try something difficult as you listen. Try to hear them as though you have never heard them. Try to hear them the way the crowd heard them, before 2,000 years of familiarity smoothed off every sharp edge. Because these stories have sharp edges, every one of them. And the reason they can still cut is that the world they describe has not changed nearly as much as we like to think it has. So wherever you are right now, whatever room you are sitting in, whatever hour it is where you are, whatever has been happening in your life in the days and weeks leading up to this moment, you are welcome here. You do not have to arrive with your questions already answered or your faith already sturdy. You do not have to perform or pretend or present a version of yourself that has it more together than you actually feel. That is not how the crowds came to Jesus, and it is not how anyone has to come here. They came with their doubts and their exhaustion and their bad reputations and their unresolved lives, and he told them stories. Let us begin. Before we open the first of these stories, I want to make one request, and it is the only one I'm going to make right now. If you would, please subscribe to this channel. That is it. That is the whole ask. It costs you nothing. It is completely free, and it takes a single tap. And I am asking for one simple reason, because these teachings come out every week, and the internet has a way of carrying people past things they meant to come back to. You will listen to this today, and something in it will do you good, and then the days will move the way days do, and the next teaching will be released and you will not be there for it. Not because you decided to leave, but because nothing was holding the door open. Subscribing holds the door open. It gives you a steady place to return to, the same seat every week in a room where nobody is in a hurry and the word is taken slowly. If you would like to do that, just tap the subscribe button below this video. That is all it takes. And then come right back, because we are about to begin. One more thing before we do. I would love it if you would leave a comment, and not a long one. Just one word. One single word for what you are carrying into this teaching today. The weight you are hoping to set down somewhere in these next hours. It does not have to be explained or justified or made presentable. Grief, money, waiting, fear, my son, my health, tired, whatever the true word is. Put it in the comments and then watch what happens underneath this video as the honest words of strangers begin to gather there. Because you're not the only one carrying something. And there is a strange and holy comfort in seeing that written out in front of you. Now, let us open the word together. Why Jesus told stories. A word before the 45. Before we walk into the first parable, it is worth pausing to ask a question that most people skip right past. Why did Jesus teach this way at all? He could have taught any way he wanted. He could have lectured. He could have issued decrees. He could have handed down a systematic theology so airtight that no one could argue with a line of it. Instead, again and again, he opened his mouth and said, "A certain man had 2 sons. A sower went out to sow. The kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchantman seeking goodly pearls." The word we translate as parable comes from the Greek parabole, which is built from 2 parts, para, meaning alongside, and ballo, meaning to throw or to cast. A parable is something thrown alongside something else. It is one thing laid next to another thing, so that the light of the first falls on the second, and you finally see it. Jesus takes the invisible kingdom of God and throws it down alongside a fishing net, a mustard seed, a corrupt business manager, a father running down a road, and suddenly you can see the shape of something you could never have seen described directly. This is not decoration. It is the only honest way to talk about certain realities. There are truths that cannot be handed to you as information, because information is something you can hold at arm's length, evaluate, file away, and remain unchanged by. A story does not let you do that. A story pulls you inside it before you have decided whether you agree with it. By the time you realize which character you are in the story, it is too late. You are already implicated. That is exactly what happened to the religious leaders who listened to Jesus. They understood perfectly. That was the problem. And there is a second reason, and Jesus states it himself, and it troubles people. He said he spoke in parables so that seeing they might not see and hearing they might not understand. That sounds on the surface like a deliberate act of concealment, as though he were hiding truth from people who wanted it. But look closer at what a parable actually does. A parable does not lock the door. It leaves the door unlocked and requires you to push it open. It gives itself only to the person who is willing to sit with it, to turn it over, to keep asking. The casual listener hears a nice story about farming and walks away entertained. The hungry listener hears the same story and cannot stop thinking about it and comes back and asks. The parable sorts the crowd. Not by intelligence, not by education, not by religious credential, but by hunger, which means that the 45 stories in front of us are not going to give themselves to you automatically. They will give themselves to you in proportion to how badly you want them. That is not a threat. It is an invitation, and it is the most generous kind of invitation there is, because it is one that anyone can accept. The scholar and the person who never finished school, the lifelong believer, and the person listening to this in the middle of the night, wondering whether any of it is true. We are going to walk through the 45 in 5 movements. First, the parables of the kingdom hidden in ordinary things, the seeds and the yeast, and the treasure buried in a field. Second, the parables of mercy, where Jesus tells us what the Father is actually like, and the answer is more scandalous than most of us have made peace with. Third, the parables of the cost, the ones that count what following him actually requires. Fourth, the parables of money and time and the things we quietly trust instead of God. And fifth, the parables of the return, the stories about waiting, watching, and what it will mean when the King comes back. 45 stories. One kingdom, and a life on the other side of them that will not look the way it looked when you sat down. Let us begin with a farmer walking across a field. Part 1, the kingdom hidden in ordinary things. Parable 1, the sower. Matthew 13:3-9. Behold, a sower went forth to sow. And when he sowed, some seeds fell by the wayside, and the fowls came and devoured them up. This is the first one for a reason, and Jesus said so himself. When his disciples came to him privately afterward and asked what it meant, he answered them with a question that has an edge on it. Do you not understand this parable? How then will you understand all the parables? In other words, this one is the key. Get this one and the door opens on all the rest. Miss this one and you will spend the rest of your life hearing stories and not knowing what to do with them. So, what is it about? On the surface, it is a farming report. A man walks across a field with a bag of seed slung over his shoulder, scattering it by hand in wide arcs, the way farmers in that part of the world had done for thousands of years. The seed lands where it lands. Some of it falls on the hard-packed path that runs along the edge of the field, where the birds see it lying exposed and take it before it can be covered. Some falls on the thin layer of soil that lies over the limestone shelf just beneath the surface. Soil that heats up fast and sprouts fast, so that the plant shoots up quickly and looks for a few days like the healthiest thing in the field, until the roots hit rock and the sun comes out and the whole thing withers in an afternoon. Some falls among thorn roots that are already in the ground, invisible, waiting, and when the wheat comes up, the thorns come up with it and slowly, patiently strangle it. and some falls on good ground and produces a harvest of 30, 60, 100 times what was planted. Notice what this parable is not. It is not a parable about the quality of the seed. The seed is the same everywhere. It is not a parable about the skill of the sower. He sows the same way across the whole field. Jesus tells us plainly that the seed is the word of God, and the sower is the one who brings it. The variable in this story, the only variable, is the ground. That is the uncomfortable center of it. The word of God does not fail. The word of God lands. And what happens next depends on what it lands in. Consider the four soils honestly, because Jesus was not describing four types of people out there somewhere. He was describing four conditions of the human heart, and most of us have been all four of them at different points in our lives. Some of us in the same week. The hard path is not evil ground. It is simply ground that has been walked on so many times that nothing can get into it. It has been compacted by traffic. That is what a life of relentless motion does to a soul. The word arrives, and it does not sink in because there is no give in the surface anymore. It lies on top, exposed, and something carries it off before the day is over. The rocky ground is the most heartbreaking of the four because it looks best at the beginning. Here is the person who receives a word with instant, genuine joy. The emotional response is real, not fake. But there is a shelf of rock under the topsoil that the enthusiasm never reaches. Jesus names exactly what exposes it. When tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, immediately they are offended. Not doubt, not argument, heat. The moment following costs something. The plant with no root has nothing to draw on. The thorny ground is the one that should make comfortable people nervous, because nothing dramatic happens here at all. There is no persecution, no crisis, no dramatic falling away. There is only the slow, quiet, entirely respectable strangling of a real spiritual life by the cares of this world, the deceitfulness of riches, and the desires for other things. Note that phrase, the deceitfulness of riches. Not the evil of riches, their deceitfulness, the lie they tell, which is that once you have enough of them, you will finally be able to breathe. The thorns do not announce themselves as enemies. They present themselves as responsibilities. And then the good ground, which Luke describes beautifully as an honest and good heart, having heard the word, keeping it, and bringing forth fruit with patience. Three things: hearing, keeping, and patience. Not brilliance, not intensity, patience. Here is what you can do with this parable today, and it is more hopeful than it first appears. In a field, the soil cannot change itself, but you are not a field. You can break up hard ground. You can go looking for the rock shelf under your enthusiasm and ask God to break it. You can name the thorns growing quietly in your life and pull them one at a time before they close over your head. That is the whole reason he told this story first, because everything else he is about to say is seed, and the only question that matters is what you are going to do about the ground. Parable 2, the wheat and the tares, Matthew 13:24-30. The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. Every honest believer eventually collides with the same question, and it usually arrives in the form of a wound rather than an argument. If God is good, and if God is powerful, why is his field so full of things that clearly do not belong there? Why is there so much evil mixed in with so much good, and why does God not simply reach down and pull it out? Jesus answers that question with a story about a specific and vicious crime. The plant he names, zizania in Greek, usually translated tares, is almost certainly darnel, a weed that grows across the Middle East, and that has one particularly cruel property. In its early stages, it is nearly indistinguishable from wheat. The blade looks the same. The height is the same. Only when the heads form, late in the season, Can you tell them apart? Because wheat grows heavy and bows down, while darnel stays upright and empty. And darnel roots tangle themselves around wheat roots underground, where no one can see. Sowing darnel into an enemy's field was a real act of sabotage in the ancient world, so real that Roman law specifically addressed it as a crime. It was a way of destroying a man without ever touching him, and it was patient. He would not even know it had happened until months later when the harvest came up wrong. So the servants come to the householder in genuine distress. "Did you not sow good seed in your field? Where did these come from?" And he tells them the truth. An enemy has done this. Then comes the question that is really the whole parable, the question that every zealous heart in every generation asks, "Shall we go and pull them up?" And he says, "No, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them." Sit with that refusal, because it is one of the most important things Jesus ever said about how God governs the world in the meantime. It is not indifference, it is not weakness, it is not that the master cannot tell the difference. He can and he will, and he says so plainly, at harvest they will be separated, completely and permanently. The delay is not a failure of justice. The delay is mercy operating under a constraint that impatient people always underestimate. The roots are tangled together. Think about what that means practically. You cannot conduct a purge of the world's evil without tearing up an enormous amount of good along with it, because in this age the two are grown together in ways no human eye can untangle. Every attempt in history to establish a pure community by removing the impure has ended by destroying the very thing it set out to protect. The Inquisition, the Purge, the Crusade, the church split, the family cut off, all of them are servants running into the field with their hands out, convinced they can tell which is which. And there is something even more personal in it. If the master had granted the request and the tares had been pulled that morning, some of us would not be here. Because there are people who looked exactly like darnel for the first 40 years of their lives and then turned. Paul looked like darnel. The thief on the cross looked like darnel until about 3 hours before he died. The delay you resent when you look at the world is the same delay that gave you your own time. What this parable asks of you is not passivity. It is not a command to stop caring about evil or stop pursuing justice. It is a command to stop taking the harvest into your own hands, to stop making the final judgment about which people are permanently what they currently appear to be. That verdict is not yours. It was never assigned to you. Someone else will handle the harvest, and he will handle it perfectly. And until then, your job is to grow where you were planted in a field that has weeds in it. Which, by the way, is the second hard truth in this story. You are not going to get a clean field in this life. Not in the world, not in your country, not in your church, and not in your own heart. Anyone who promises you, one is selling something. Grow anyway. Parable 3. The mustard seed. Matthew 13:31-32. The kingdom of heaven is like to a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all seeds. But when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs, and becometh a tree. Almost everyone knows this one, and almost everyone has reduced it to a motivational slogan. Small things grow into big things. Which is true, and which is also so thin a reading that it misses nearly everything Jesus was actually doing. Understand first who he was talking to and what they were waiting for. First-century Israel was aching for the kingdom of God, and they had a fairly clear picture of how it would arrive. It would come the way kingdoms come, visibly, forcefully from the top down. A Messiah would appear, Rome would fall, the temple would be vindicated, and everyone would know in a single afternoon that God had acted. That was not a fringe belief. That was the mainstream expectation of devout people who had read their prophets carefully. And into that expectation, Jesus drops a seed the size of a speck of dust. The mustard seed was proverbially the smallest thing a Jewish farmer handled. Rabbis used it in legal discussions as the standard unit of smallness, the way we might say a hair's breadth. So when Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, he is saying something almost offensive. The thing you have been waiting for your entire national history, the intervention of God in history, is beginning right now in front of you, at a scale so small you would not notice it if you were not told. And that is exactly what it looked like. 12 men, most of them uneducated, one of whom would betray him and another of whom would deny him. A rural teacher with no institutional backing. A movement whose founder would be executed as a criminal within 3 years. If you had been a Roman official filing a report on religious movements in the provinces that year, this one would not have made the list. But here is the part of the parable people skip. The mustard plant is not botanically the greatest of trees. Jesus was not making a claim about horticulture, and his listeners knew it. In fact, mustard was a slightly scandalous choice, because it was an aggressive, invasive plant that farmers often did not want in a cultivated field at all. It spreads, it takes over. You do not plant mustard casually, and when he describes birds lodging in its branches, he is reaching back to imagery the prophets used. Ezekiel and Daniel both describe great kingdoms as trees with birds sheltering in their branches. So the picture is deliberate. This ridiculous little seed is going to become the sheltering tree that the empires thought they were. The kingdom of God will not arrive by matching Rome's methods. It will start smaller than anything Rome would bother to notice, and it will end up outlasting Rome entirely. Now bring it home, because this parable has a personal edge that the historical reading alone will not reach. If God's kingdom operates on the logic of the mustard seed, then the way you have been measuring your own life is probably wrong. We have been trained by everything around us to evaluate significance by immediate visible scale. Numbers, reach, platform, speed, and a great deal of quiet despair in ordinary believers comes from applying that scale to their own faithfulness and concluding that it does not amount to anything. The kitchen conversation with your child that you will not remember by next month. The prayer you said for someone who never knew you prayed it. The apology you made that cost you more than anyone realized. The money you gave that nobody saw. The decision you made in private not to do the thing you wanted to do. These are mustard seeds. They are so small that they are invisible even to you, and they are exactly the size that God has historically preferred to work with. Do not despise the day of small things. It is not a consolation prize for people whose lives never became impressive. It is the actual mechanism by which the kingdom of God has always advanced. Parable 4, the leaven, Matthew 13:33. The kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till the whole was leavened. One sentence, that is the entire parable. Jesus tells it immediately after the mustard seed, and the two are usually treated as a matched pair saying roughly the same thing. Small beginnings, large endings. But they are not saying the same thing at all, and the difference matters. The mustard seed is about size. The leaven is about method. A woman takes a lump of leaven, in that world a piece of fermented dough saved back from the previous batch, alive with wild yeast, and she works it into 3 measures of meal. That detail is not incidental. 3 measures is roughly 40 to 50 pounds of flour. That is not a household loaf. That is enough bread for a village gathering, over 100 servings. The scale is deliberately absurd, and the listeners would have caught it. This is baking day for an entire community, and one small handful of living dough is going to change every particle of it. Now watch the verb. The King James says she hid it. The Greek is encrypto, the root of our word encrypt. She buries it. It disappears into the flour, and for a while nothing whatsoever appears to be happening. There is no drama. There is no visible activity. If you walked into the kitchen and looked at the bowl, you would see flour. And then, slowly, the whole thing changes. Not by force, not by being attacked from outside, by something living working its way through from within, cell by cell, until there is no part of that 50 pounds of flour that is not different from what it was. That is how God works in a human life, and it is why so many sincere people conclude that nothing is happening to them. We want transformation to be an event. We want a night, a service, a moment we can point to and date, and God does sometimes give those. But the ordinary way that grace works its way through a personality is far closer to fermentation than to explosion. Invisible for long stretches, unimpressive at any given moment, and thorough beyond anything a single dramatic experience could accomplish. The person who was harsh at 30 and is gentle at 50 usually cannot tell you when it happened. There was no ceremony. There was just leaven in the flour and time. There is something bracing here too. Leaven works on everything or it works on nothing. It does not leaven the top half of the bowl and leave the bottom half alone, which means the kingdom of God, once it is genuinely in you, is not going to stay in the religious compartment of your life. It will get into your marriage. It will get into your finances. It will get into the way you speak about people who are not in the room. It will get into your ambition and your calendar and the private thoughts you assumed were nobody's business. That is not an overreach. That is what leaven does. And note who is holding it. A woman working in a kitchen, doing the most ordinary domestic task in her world. Jesus has just compared the coming kingdom of God to a farmer and now to a housewife making bread. And in doing so, he has quietly said something about where the kingdom actually shows up. Not primarily in temples and courts, in kitchens, in fields, in whatever ordinary place you will be standing tomorrow morning. If you feel like nothing is happening in you, if you have been praying the same prayers about the same weakness for years and cannot detect a shred of progress, this one sentence is for you. Hidden things are still working. Fermentation is not failure. Give it time and stay in the bowl. Parable 5 of the hidden treasure, Matthew 13:44. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto treasure hid in a field, the which when a man hath found he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he hath, and buyeth that field. In a land that had been invaded and re-invaded for centuries, with no banking system available to ordinary people, burying valuables in the ground was simply what you did when armies were coming. And sometimes the person who buried them died or was taken or never came back, and the treasure stayed in the ground, forgotten, sometimes for generations. Everyone listening to Jesus knew this. Everyone had heard of it happening. It was the ancient equivalent of finding something extraordinary in the wall of an old house. So the scene is not fantasy. A man is working in a field that belongs to someone else, probably a hired laborer ploughing or digging, and his tool strikes something that is not rock. He uncovers it, and in that moment his entire life divides into before and after. What he does next is the parable. He covers it back up. He tells no one. He goes home and he sells everything he owns, every possession, every tool, whatever land he had, whatever security he had accumulated in a lifetime of hard work. And he takes all of it and buys that one field. To any outside observer, this is financial insanity. He is liquidating a real life for a piece of dirt. Anyone watching would have said the man had lost his mind, and he would have had no way to explain himself without giving up the secret. So he simply absorbs the appearance of foolishness and does it anyway. Now here is the phrase that unlocks the whole story, and most readings rush past it. For joy thereof. For joy he goes and sells all that he has. This is not a story about sacrifice in the way we usually mean sacrifice, grim, teeth-gritted, dutiful. There is no reluctance in this man anywhere. He's not weighing costs. He is not making a noble but painful renunciation. He is doing what any sane person would do in his position, and he is doing it in a state of barely contained delight because he has seen the value of what is in that field, and everything he owns has become laughably cheap by comparison. That is the difference between religion and discovery. Religion says, give up what you love in order to obtain God's approval. It produces people who are technically obedient and quietly resentful, because they have paid a price and not seen a treasure. This parable says something else entirely. When you actually see what is in the field, giving up everything else stops feeling like a loss. It starts feeling like the most obvious trade anyone has ever been offered, which means the real question this parable puts to you is not, have you sacrificed enough? It is, have you seen it? Because a person who has seen it does not need to be argued into anything. And a person who has not seen it cannot be argued into anything that will last. There is one more detail worth sitting with. The man was not looking. He was not on a spiritual quest. He was working an ordinary day in an ordinary field, doing a job he had probably done 1,000 times before, and the treasure was already there. It had been there the whole time, under the feet of everyone who had ever walked across that ground without knowing. Some of you are going to find it exactly that way. Not on a mountaintop, not in an extraordinary season. In the middle of a Tuesday, in the middle of work, you find unremarkable in a field you have crossed 1,000 times. Keep digging where you are. It is closer than you think. Parable 6, the pearl of great price. Matthew 13, 45, 46. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchant man, seeking goodly pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had, and bought it. Jesus tells this one immediately after the hidden treasure, and at first glance it appears to be the same story told twice. Both men find something extraordinary. Both sell everything. Both end up with the prize. But he did not waste words, and the differences are the point. The man in the field was not looking. This man has been looking his whole life. He is a merchant, a dealer in pearls, which in the ancient world were the single most valuable commodity a person could trade in, worth more by weight than gold. This is a man who has spent decades training his eye. He knows luster. He knows flaw. He has handled thousands of pearls and can tell you within seconds what any of them is worth. He is, in modern terms, an expert with a portfolio. And one day he sees a pearl that ends his career, because that is what he does. He does not add it to his inventory. He does not buy it in order to sell it at a profit, which is the entire logic of his profession. He sells his inventory, all of it, the accumulated holdings of a lifetime of good judgment, and buys one pearl that he will never sell. The moment he owns it, he is no longer a merchant. He is simply a man who owns one thing. So here are two roads to the same place. One man stumbles into the kingdom while doing manual labor and never suspected a thing. The other spends his life as a seeker, a student, a connoisseur of valuable things, and arrives at the same total surrender. Jesus is quietly telling us that both stories are real. Some of you were ambushed by God. Some of you searched for years. Neither route is more legitimate than the other, and both end in exactly the same posture. Everything else on the table, one thing in the hand. Now, the harder question, and it is worth asking honestly, is the merchant richer or poorer at the end of this story? By any accounting, his assets have not increased. He traded a diversified portfolio for a single item. But no one who has understood the story would call it a loss, because value is not the same thing as quantity. He now owns one thing that is worth more than all the many things he used to own, and there is a freedom in that which he never had before. He is no longer managing 100 concerns, he has one. That is what happens to a person when Christ becomes genuinely central rather than technically important. The number of things they are anxious about goes down. Not because their circumstances got simpler, but because the hierarchy inside them finally resolved. Most human misery comes from having many things that all claim to be ultimate, all competing, all making demands, none of them able to hold the weight. The merchant escapes that permanently. He has one pearl. And there is one more reading of this story that the church has treasured for centuries, and I think it is true even if it is not the primary sense. Turn it around and ask who else in Scripture sells everything he has to obtain one thing of surpassing value. There is a merchant in this story who gave up all that he had. Jesus emptied himself, took the form of a servant, and paid everything to purchase a people. If you have ever wondered whether you are worth anything to God, notice what he was willing to pay and stop arguing with the price he set. Parable 7, the dragnet, Matthew 13:47-50. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net that was cast into the sea and gathered of every kind, which, when it was full, they drew to shore, and sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but cast the bad away. Several of the men listening to this had done exactly what Jesus is describing for a living for years. A dragnet, sagene in Greek, is not a small casting net thrown by one man from the shore. It is a large weighted net, sometimes hundreds of feet long, dragged between boats or hauled in from the beach by teams of men. It does not select. It cannot select. It takes in whatever is in the water in front of it. Edible fish, inedible fish, fish that Levitical law made unclean, weeds, debris, everything. The sorting cannot happen in the water. It happens on the shore when the net is full and the men sit down and go through the catch by hand. This is the second parable in this chapter about a delayed separation, and Jesus tells it a second time because he knows how badly we want the sorting to happen now. The wheat and tares dealt with the mixture in the world. This one deals with the mixture in the church, in the visible gathering of people who have been drawn in by the gospel. And it says something that ought to steady us in a generation that finds it endlessly disillusioning. A net that catches everything is not a broken net. It is a net doing its job. The presence of people in the church who do not belong to Christ is not proof that the mission failed. It is the predictable result of casting a net wide enough to catch anyone. That should protect you from two opposite errors. The first is the error of the purist, who looks at the mixed catch flopping on the deck, concludes that the whole enterprise is corrupt, and walks away. Many sincere people have left the faith not because they stopped believing in Christ, but because they could not tolerate the mixture. This parable was told in advance for exactly those people. He knew. He said so. He is not surprised by what you found in the net, and he did not promise you a filtered one. The second is the error of complacency, and this one is heavier. Being in the net is not the same as being kept. Every fish in that net was caught. Every one of them was inside. And the moment came when hands went through the catch and made distinctions that the fish had no say in. Church attendance, biblical literacy, cultural Christianity, growing up in the faith, all of these put you in the net. None of them is the sorting. Jesus ends this parable as he ends the wheat and tares, with language about fire and about weeping, and it is worth noticing that some of the sharpest warnings he ever issued were aimed not at outsiders, but at insiders who assumed their position was secure. He did not do this to torment people. He did it because a warning delivered while there is still time is one of the kindest things love can do. So the question this parable leaves in your hands is a quiet and personal one, and it does not need to be answered out loud. Not, is the church full of hypocrites? It is, he told you it would be, but on the shore, when the sorting comes and no one's opinion but his matters, what will I be found to be? That is a question you can still do something about today, which is the whole reason he asked it. Parable 8, the seed growing secretly. Mark 4:26-29. So is the kingdom of God, as if a man should cast seed into the ground, and should sleep and rise night and day, and the seed should spring and grow up, He knoweth not how. This parable appears only in Mark. It is 4 sentences long, and it may be the most quietly liberating thing Jesus ever said to people who are exhausted from trying to make things grow. A man scatters seed. Then, and this is the whole action of the story, he goes to bed. He gets up, he does his work, he goes to bed again, and the days pass, and the seed does what seed does. The earth brings forth fruit of herself, first the blade, then the ear, then the full corn in the ear. And the farmer, Jesus says, does not know how. He does not know how. That is the line. Think about how strange that is to modern ears. We do know how now. We can explain germination at the cellular level. We can diagram photosynthesis. We can sequence the genome of the wheat. And none of that has made the slightest difference to the point Jesus is making, because the point was never about botanical ignorance. The point is about agency. The farmer is not the one doing it. He can prepare the ground, and he can put the seed in, and he can pull weeds and wait for rain. But the actual miracle, the transformation of a dead-looking speck into a living plant, happens without him, underground, in the dark. On a schedule he did not set and cannot accelerate. If you are a parent, this is your parable. If you are a teacher, a pastor, a counselor, a person praying for a friend who is far from God, this is your parable. Because the great occupational hazard of loving someone spiritually is the belief that if you just find the right words, the right approach, the right amount of pressure, you can make growth happen. You cannot. You were never given that power, and every attempt to exercise it does damage to them and to you. What you were given is the seed and the sowing. And notice what the farmer does with his nights. He sleeps. That detail is doing real theological work. The ability to sleep is a spiritual indicator. It means you have handed the outcome to someone else. The person who cannot stop working the field at midnight, who cannot lie down, who rehearses conversations at 2 in the morning and gets up exhausted to try again. That person has, somewhere along the way, taken on a job that belongs to God. Sleep is an act of trust. Every night you lie down, you are declaring that the growth of the kingdom does not depend on your consciousness. There is a second gift in this parable, and it is patience with the invisible stages. The text gives us the sequence deliberately. First the blade, then the ear, then the full corn. Nobody harvests a blade. A blade is not a failure of a plant. It is a stage of one. And a great deal of unnecessary discouragement in the Christian life comes from evaluating a blade as though it should already be grain. In a child, in a new believer, in a friend who has taken one small step and not 12, in yourself. Sow, sleep, wait. He knows how. You do not have to. Parable 9, treasures new and old, Matthew 13:52. Then said he unto them, Therefore every scribe which is instructed unto the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder, which bringeth forth out of his treasure things new and old. This is the parable that closes the great chapter of kingdom parables, and it is easy to miss because it is one verse and it sounds almost like a footnote. It is not a footnote. It is Jesus telling his listeners what he expects them to become as a result of everything he has just said. Picture the household. A well-run ancient house had a storeroom, and in the storeroom was the family's accumulated wealth. Not just money, but linens, garments, vessels, provisions, things gathered over generations. Some of it was old, inherited, aged, proven, valuable precisely because it had lasted. Some of it was new, recently acquired, fresh, made for present needs. A good householder knew what was in there and knew which thing to bring out for which occasion. He was not sentimental about the old and not infatuated with the new. He was competent with both. That, Jesus says, is what a person trained in the kingdom looks like. He uses the word scribe on purpose, the professional students of Scripture, the men whose whole vocation was the careful preservation of what had been handed down. Many of them were his opponents, and their failure was not that they loved the old. Their failure was that they could not receive the new when it arrived, even when the new was the fulfillment of everything the old had been pointing toward. They had a storeroom full of treasure and had nailed the door shut, but he is warning in the other direction too, and this direction is more common in our time. There is a kind of enthusiasm that has no use for anything old. It wants a faith assembled entirely from what feels fresh and immediate, new insight, new experience, new expression, with no patience for creeds, no interest in what the church has already learned at enormous cost, no sense that anyone before us understood anything. That is not a householder. That is a man standing in an empty room, congratulating himself on his freedom from clutter. The mature believer is a person with a full storeroom. They can bring out the old, a psalm memorized in childhood, a line from a hymn, a truth their grandmother lived by, the ancient anchors of the faith that have held 10,000 generations of shaking people. And they can bring out the new, a fresh insight from this morning's reading, a way of speaking to this moment that their grandparents never had to learn. A mercy discovered in a situation nobody in their family line ever faced. Ask yourself honestly which one your storeroom is short on. Some of you need to go and get some old things. You have been living on the last thing you felt, and you need something under your feet that was tested before you were born. Others of you have a room full of ancient furniture that you have not touched in years. And God is trying to hand you something new, and you keep refusing it because it did not come in the form you were expecting. The kingdom fills the room with both, and then it expects you to open the door and bring things out, because a storeroom exists to feed a household, not to be admired. Part 2. The Heart of the Father. Parables of Mercy and the Lost Parable. 10. The Lost Sheep. Luke 15:3-7. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he lose one of them, doth not leave the 99 in the wilderness, and go after that which is lost until he find it? Before we look at the story, look at what provoked it, because Luke tells us, and it changes everything. The tax collectors and the notorious sinners of the region were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the religious professionals watched this and murmured a sentence that they meant as an accusation, and that turned out to be the finest summary of the gospel anyone had produced that year. This man receiveth sinners and eateth with them. That complaint is the reason for the next 3 parables. Jesus does not answer with an argument. He tells them 3 stories about lost things, and this is the first. 100 sheep is a substantial flock, probably owned by an extended family. At the end of the day, the shepherd counts them into the fold, and the count comes up 99. Now, and this is where our sentimentality about this parable usually begins, we tend to imagine that the shepherd's response is an act of extravagant, uneconomical love. It is love, but it is not uneconomical. Any shepherd in that world would have gone. The sheep is worth money, it belongs to somebody, and leaving it out overnight is leaving it to die. Jesus opens the story with what man of you? Because he is starting from something they all agree on. Of course you would go. The unspoken force of the parable then is this: you would do it for livestock. And you are standing here objecting that I am doing it for people. Notice the small word in the middle of the verse that carries more weight than any other in the story: until. He goes after that which is lost until he find it. There is no time limit. There is no point at which the search is called off as unreasonable. There is no sheep so far out, so tangled in thorns, so deep in a ravine that the shepherd turns around and decides the loss is acceptable. Until, and when he finds it, watch what he does. He does not drive it home. He does not discipline it. A sheep that has been lost and terrified is often unable to walk, and the shepherd does the only thing that will work. He lifts it and lays it on his shoulders, and he carries it the whole way, rejoicing. Every one of us who has ever come back to God has some memory of being carried. There is a particular kind of return that you did not have the strength to make on your own, and you know very well that you did not engineer it. Something came and got you. Then the story does something no one expected. The shepherd gets home and throws a party. He calls the neighbors, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost." And Jesus lands it. There is joy in heaven over one sinner that repents. One, not 1,000, not a movement, not a revival, not a stadium. One. If you have ever wondered what God feels about you coming home, not what he permits, not what he tolerates, but what he feels, the answer in this parable is joy. Loud, public, neighbor-summoning joy. That is the heart the religious men were murmuring about, and it is still the heart that receives whoever walks back through the door tonight. Parable 11, the lost coin, Luke 15:8-10. Either what woman, having 10 pieces of silver, if she lose one piece, doth not light a candle, and sweep the house, and seek diligently till she find it? The second story in the trilogy, and Jesus deliberately changes the cast. First, a man with sheep, now a woman with coins. He is making sure that no one listening can say this heart belongs only to one kind of person or one kind of life. 10 silver coins, drachmas, each roughly a day's wage for a laborer. For a woman in a peasant household, 10 drachmas could easily represent everything she had. Many scholars believe the 10 pieces were her marriage headdress. Coins strung together and worn, the equivalent of a wedding ring in that culture, both her security and her identity. Whether or not that is the case here, one thing is certain. Losing 1 out of 10 is not a trivial loss to a woman living close to the edge. So look at the search itself, because the details are chosen with care. She lights a candle. Peasant homes in first-century Galilee had few windows and floors of packed dirt or rough stone. A dropped coin does not glint, it disappears into the seams and the dust. So the first thing she does is bring light into a dark place. Then she sweeps, and anyone who has swept a rough floor looking for something small knows that you sweep in order to hear it, the small metallic sound that tells you where it went. And she seeks diligently until she finds it. There is that word again, until. Here is what makes this parable different from the one before it, and why Jesus told both. A sheep can wander. A sheep makes choices, however dim. It puts its head down, follows the grass, and looks up an hour later with no idea where it is. But a coin cannot wander. A coin does nothing at all. It is lost through no action of its own, and it lies exactly where it fell, unable to cry out, unable to move toward home, unaware that it is even missing. Some people are lost like sheep. They know they drifted. They can trace the steps. And some people are lost like a coin. They did not rebel. There was no dramatic departure. Something happened to them. A family fell apart. A church wounded them. A season of grief took the feeling out of everything. Life simply got heavy, and they slipped between the boards without ever deciding to. They are not defiant. They are just somewhere dark, and they cannot get themselves back. This parable is for them, because the coin's helplessness does not slow the search down by a single minute. She is on her hands and knees with a lamp, going over the same floor again, because the value of the coin was never determined by the coin's ability to participate in its own recovery. And note what the coin retains while it is lost: everything. It does not lose its silver content lying in the dust. It is not worth less because of where it ended up. It only needs to be found. Then, the same ending as the last story. She calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me." 2 parties in 2 stories, and a third one coming. Jesus is hammering one point into the ears of men who thought God's primary emotion towards sinners was disapproval. There is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner that repents. If you are the one in the dust tonight, unable to move toward him, not even sure how you got here, hear this. Somebody has lit a lamp. Somebody is sweeping, and she does not stop until Parable 12, the prodigal son, Luke 15:11-32. And he arose and came to his father, but when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. This is the most famous story ever told, and it has been so worn smooth by repetition that we have to work to feel what it did to the people who first heard it. So let us go back and let it be shocking again. A younger son comes to his father and asks for his share of the inheritance. Understand what that request meant in an honor-based village culture. Inheritance is what you receive when your father dies. To ask for it while he is standing in front of you healthy is to say, in effect, I wish you were dead, and the waiting has become inconvenient. It is a public repudiation. In that world, the expected response from the father, the response the village would have demanded, was rejection, possibly a formal ceremony declaring the son cut off. Instead, the father divides his living between them. He gives it, which means he sells land, liquidates a portion of an ancestral estate, and hands it to a boy who has just insulted him in front of everyone. It is the first outrageous act of the story, and it comes from the father, not the son. The boy goes to a far country and spends it all. Then a famine hits. The story is careful to note that his ruin was partly his own doing and partly the world simply being what it is. And he ends up feeding pigs, which for a Jewish listener is the bottom of the world, and longing to eat what the pigs were eating. And then the verse that has rescued millions. He came to himself. Notice the phrasing. Not he became a better person. Not he repented perfectly. He came to himself, he woke up, saw where he was, and remembered that there was bread in his father's house. His motives at this point are frankly mixed. He is hungry. He rehearses a speech on the road, and the speech includes an offer to work as a hired servant, which is still an attempt to negotiate a position rather than receive a gift. Most of us come home with mixed motives. Apparently that is close enough. Now the part of the story that would have made a first-century crowd gasp. When he was yet a great way off, his father saw him, which tells you the father had been watching that road, and he ran. Middle-aged men of standing in that culture did not run. It required pulling up the long robe and exposing the legs, an act of humiliation. Scholars have long pointed out something else. A son who had squandered family property among Gentiles and returned in disgrace would likely have faced open shame from the village before he ever reached his father's door. The father runs to reach him first. He takes the humiliation onto himself and covers the boy with it before anyone else can lay a hand on him. The son gets partway through his prepared speech and the father interrupts him. Bring the best robe, the ring, shoes, the fatted calf. The robe is honor, the ring is authority, the shoes mean son, not servant. The calf means the whole village is eating tonight, and therefore the whole village is going to accept him. And then Jesus does the thing that reveals who the story was actually aimed at. He does not end there. There is an older brother in the field who hears music, refuses to come in, and says to his father, These many years do I serve thee, neither transgressed I at any time thy commandment, and yet thou never gavest me a kid. Listen to the word serve. He has been in his father's house his entire life, and has experienced it as employment. He has kept every rule, and has no idea who his father is. The Pharisees were standing right there. This was them, and they knew it. The father goes out a second time. That is the detail that undoes me, and pleads with the elder son the same way he ran to the younger. Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. And the story stops. No ending. We are never told whether the older brother came in, because the men Jesus was telling it to were still deciding. Two sons, two ways to be lost, one by running away, one by staying home and keeping score. One father who humiliates himself twice in two directions to bring both of them to the same table. That is the God who was being murmured about for eating with sinners. Parable 13, the two debtors, Luke 7:41-43. There was a certain creditor which had two debtors. The one owed 500 pence, and the other 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me therefore which of them will love him most. Jesus is at dinner in the house of a Pharisee named Simon, and a woman of the city, a woman with a reputation everyone in the room knew about, has come in behind him and begun to weep on his feet, wiping them with her hair and anointing them with ointment. Simon says nothing out loud, but Jesus answers his thoughts anyway. Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee. Then this parable, which is only 3 sentences and which functions like a scalpel. 2 men owe money. One owes 500 denarii, roughly 2 years of wages. One owes 50, roughly 2 months. The creditor forgives both. Which will love him more? Simon answers a little grudgingly that he supposes it is the one who was forgiven more, and Jesus says, Thou hast rightly judged. Then he turns and looks at the woman while still speaking to the host, one of the most quietly devastating moments in the Gospels, and itemizes the contrast. Simon gave him no water for his feet, no kiss of greeting, no oil for his head. Basic hospitality, all of it withheld, and this woman has not stopped washing his feet with her tears since he came in. Here is the crucial thing to see, and it is easy to get backwards. Jesus is not teaching that some people are small sinners and some are large ones. Both debtors in the parable have exactly the same problem. They have nothing to pay. That phrase covers both of them equally. The difference between the 2 men is not the reality of their bankruptcy, it is their awareness of it. Simon's debt was not 50 denarii. Simon's debt was 500 as well. But Simon had spent his life in a religious system that gave him a running sense of being roughly current on his account, and so he sat at his own table with the Son of God across from him and felt no particular need. This explains something that puzzles a lot of church-raised people. Why do the recently rescued so often burn with a love that the lifelong faithful cannot seem to summon? It is not that God gave them more. It is that they know what they were handed. And there is a peculiar spiritual poverty available to people who have never done anything dramatic enough to frighten themselves. A slow numbness that comes from believing your account was never that far out of balance. The good news is that the cure is not to go out and sin more. That misses it entirely. The cure is to see the actual size of what was forgiven you. If you find your love for God has gone cool and dutiful, do not start by trying to feel more. Start by looking honestly at the ledger, not the public failures, but the pride, the coldness, the unforgiveness you nurse, the private contempt you carry for people you consider beneath you, the years you spent giving God the leftovers. Look at it long enough to be alarmed by it, and then look at the cross where the whole amount was struck out. He frankly forgave them both. That word means freely, with no repayment plan, no partial arrangement, no conditions. The woman at his feet knew the number. That is the only reason she was crying. Parable 14, the unforgiving servant, Matthew 18:23-35. O thou wicked servant, I forgave thee all that debt, because thou desiredst me. Shouldest not thou also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? Peter had asked a question he probably thought was generous. Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Till 7 times? The rabbinic standard of the day suggested 3. Peter more than doubled it and waited to be praised. Jesus said, until 70 times 7. And then, because he knew that a number can be argued with, but a story cannot, he told this one. A king calls in his accounts, and a servant is brought before him owing 10,000 talents. We have to stop at that number because the whole parable turns on it, and the King James does not shout. A talent was roughly 20 years of a laborer's wages. 10,000 talents is therefore something in the range of 200,000 years of labor. It is a deliberately absurd figure, the largest number in Greek arithmetic attached to the largest unit of currency. The annual tax revenue of entire regions was a fraction of this. Jesus is not describing a large debt. He is describing an amount no human being could ever repay under any circumstances, which is the point. The servant, in a moment that is almost comic in its delusion, falls down and says, "Have patience with me, and I will pay thee all." He genuinely believes he can restructure this. Give me time and I will handle it. And the king does something the servant never requested. He does not extend the terms. He forgives the debt. The whole thing, absorbed by the crown, gone. Then that same man walks out and finds a fellow servant who owes him 100 pence. About 3 months' wages, a real debt, not nothing, the kind of amount an ordinary person could genuinely be angry about. And he takes him by the throat and says, "Pay me what thou owest." And the man falls down and says the identical words he himself had said an hour earlier, "Have patience with me," and he refuses and has him thrown into prison. Notice, the parable does not pretend the second debt is imaginary. What was done to you may have been genuinely wrong. The 100 pence was owed. Forgiveness is not the claim that nothing happened. It is the decision not to collect. The other servants see it and are grieved, and they tell the king, and the king's response is the hinge of the whole story. "Shouldest not thou also have had compassion, even as I had pity on thee?" That word, also, is where this parable lands on us. Christian forgiveness is not primarily an act of generosity flowing from you toward another person. It is an act of consistency with something that already happened to you. You are not being asked to manufacture mercy out of your own reserves. You are being asked to pass along in the amount of 100 pence what you received in the amount of 10,000 talents. And Jesus ends with a warning so severe that people have spent centuries trying to soften it. "So likewise shall my heavenly Father do also unto you, if ye from your hearts forgive not everyone his brother their trespasses." He is not teaching that you earn forgiveness by forgiving. He is teaching something more searching, that a person who has genuinely received an unpayable pardon and remains willing to strangle someone over 100 pence has almost certainly not understood what happened to him. The hands that will not open to release are the same hands that were never fully open to receive. Is there a throat you are still holding? You know the name. He is asking you to let go, not because what they did was small, but because what you were forgiven was not. Parable 15, the Pharisee and the Publican, Luke 18, 9-14. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee and the other a publican. Luke tells us exactly who this was aimed at, certain people who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Those two things always travel together. Nobody looks down on other people from a position of felt need. 2 men, same temple, same hour of prayer. And from the outside, one of them is obviously the good man. The Pharisee is not a villain in his own community. He fasts twice a week, which is more than the law required. He gives tithes of all that he possesses. He is, by any measurable standard, a serious and disciplined man, and everything he says about himself in his prayer is factually accurate. That is what makes this parable so unnerving. He is not a hypocrite in the sense of a fraud. He really does live that way. But look at his prayer, because Luke gives us a small, brutal detail in the wording. He prayed thus with himself. The address goes up, but the conversation is internal, and listen to the content. "God, I thank thee that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican." 5 clauses, 4 of them about other people, and the whole thing structured as a comparison. He has come into the presence of God and used the occasion to conduct an audit in which he is the favorable finding. He is not lying, he is measuring, and that is the error. Because the moment you're standing before God is established by comparison, you will always need someone below you in order to feel secure, which is why the man cannot pray without pointing at the tax collector across the room. Now the other man, a publican, meaning a Jew who collected taxes for the occupying empire, a collaborator, a man who had made money off his neighbor's oppression and whom everyone had every right to despise. He stands far off. He will not lift his eyes. He beats his breast, a gesture of grief so intense it was considered unusual even among mourners, and he prays 7 words in the Greek, which the King James renders, "God be merciful to me, a sinner." The wording is worth one more look, because it is even sharper than English suggests. He does not say a sinner. The definite article is there in the Greek, the sinner, not one among many, as if he were the only one in the world and the only one in the room, which is exactly the opposite of what the other man is doing. And the verb he uses for mercy is not the ordinary one. It is the word associated with atonement, with the mercy seat, with the covering of sin by blood. He is not asking to be let off, he is asking to be covered. Jesus delivers the verdict. This man went down to his house justified rather than the other. That word, justified, is a legal term, declared right. And it fell on the collaborator, not the fasting man, in the space of one honest sentence, without any preliminary program of moral improvement. Then the line that reverses the world, "Every one that exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted." Here is the practical danger, and it is worth saying out loud. The moment you finish this parable, there is a voice that wants to say, "Thank God I am not like that Pharisee." And if you say it, you have just prayed his prayer with new material. The only safe use of this story is to go into it as the publican and stay there. Parable 16, the Good Samaritan, Luke 10:25-37. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion on him. A lawyer, an expert in religious law, stands up to test Jesus and asks what he must do to inherit eternal life. Jesus turns it back on him, and the man answers correctly, "Love God with everything and love your neighbor as yourself." Then Luke tells us he asked a follow-up question willing to justify himself, "And who is my neighbor?" That is a real question with a practical purpose. If the command is to love your neighbor, then the size of the obligation depends entirely on the size of the word. Define it narrowly enough, and you can be righteous without much inconvenience. So Jesus tells him about a road. The road from Jerusalem down to Jericho is a real road, 17 miles long, dropping over 3,000 feet through desert wilderness full of rock formations and blind turns. It was notorious. Everybody in the audience had either traveled it nervously or knew someone who had been robbed on it. A man is attacked, stripped, beaten, and left half dead. Stripped is a crucial detail because clothing was how you identified a person's nationality and class. Naked and unconscious, he is unidentifiable. He is simply a human body on the ground. A priest comes down that road and passes by on the other side. Then a Levite, a temple assistant, does the same. Sermons often accuse them of cowardice or ritual squeamishness about corpse defilement, and that may be part of it. But notice that Jesus never gives their reasons. He simply reports what they did. Whatever the internal justification, the conduct was identical. They saw and they crossed. And then comes the word that made the crowd flinch, a Samaritan. We have lost the force of it. Samaritans and Jews had been in bitter religious and ethnic conflict for centuries. Mutual contempt, occasional violence, a rival temple, generations of accumulated grievance. To this audience, Good Samaritan was not a phrase, it was a contradiction. The lawyer, notably, cannot even say the word at the end of the story. When Jesus asks which of the three was neighbor, he answers, "He that showed mercy on him." Watch what the Samaritan does, because Jesus slows the pace down and lists it. He came where he was. He had compassion. He bound up his wounds. He poured in oil and wine to disinfect, oil to soothe, likely his own provisions for the journey. He set him on his own beast, which means the Samaritan walked. He brought him to an inn. He took care of him overnight. And in the morning, he paid the innkeeper 2 pence, enough for weeks of lodging, and committed to cover whatever more it cost on his return. Time, resources, safety, comfort, and an open-ended future liability given to an unconscious stranger who would never be able to reciprocate, and who, had he been awake, might have refused the help. Then Jesus does something extraordinary with the original question. The lawyer asked who qualifies as my neighbor, that is, who is in the category I'm obligated to. Jesus asks instead, which of these was a neighbor to the man? He has turned the question inside out. The issue is not identifying which people deserve your love. The issue is becoming the kind of person who is neighbor to whoever is in front of you. That reframing dismantles every version of this that we still practice. Every internal calculation about whether a person's need is legitimate, whether they brought it on themselves, whether they belong to our group, whether they would help us if the roles were reversed. The man in the ditch had no group. He had a need, and he was there. And before you leave the road, consider this. Many of the church fathers read the story with the wounded man as us, and Christ as the Samaritan, the despised outsider who came where we were, who bound up what was broken, who carried the cost, and promised to return. That reading does not replace the plain command, it fuels it. Because you will not have the strength to keep stopping for strangers until you understand that someone once stopped for you when you were the one who could not ask. Go, and do thou likewise. Parable 17, the laborers in the vineyard. Matthew 20:1-16. Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst not thou agree with me for a penny? Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil, because I am good? This is one of the parables that makes people uncomfortable, and it is supposed to. A landowner goes to the marketplace at dawn to hire day laborers for his vineyard. He agrees with them on a denarius for the day, a fair, standard wage, exactly what the work was worth. Then he goes back at 9 in the morning and hires more, again at noon, again at 3, and astonishingly, again at 5 in the afternoon, 1 hour before the workday ends, where he finds men still standing there. He asks them why they have been standing idle all day, and their answer is the most quietly heartbreaking line in the parable. Because no man hath hired us. They were not lazy. They had been there since morning. Nobody picked them. Anyone who has ever been overlooked, passed over, told they were not needed, knows that particular ache, standing in the square while the work went to somebody else. At evening, the steward is told to pay the workers beginning from the last. That detail is deliberate. The owner wants the all-day men to see what happens. The 5 o'clock men receive a denarius, a full day's wage for 1 hour, and you can feel the hope run down the line. If they got a denarius for an hour, imagine what 12 hours will bring. Then the men who bore the burden and heat of the day step forward and receive a denarius. They complain, and here is what we have to be honest about. Their complaint is completely reasonable by every standard of fairness we operate by. Equal pay for radically unequal work offends something deep in us, and the owner does not tell them they are wrong about the arithmetic. He tells them they are wrong about the category. Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst not thou agree with me for a penny? Nobody was cheated. Everyone received either exactly what was just or more than what was just. The all-day workers are not upset because they were treated unfairly. They are upset because somebody else was treated generously. Then the question that exposes everything: is thine eye evil because I am good? The phrase evil eye in that culture meant envy, the grudging resentment of another's blessing. He is naming the actual emotion, and it is not a passion for justice. It is envy wearing justice as a costume. This parable is about grace, and it explains why grace is so much harder for religious people to swallow than they admit. Everyone loves grace when they are the 5 o'clock worker. Almost nobody loves it when they have been in the vineyard since dawn, and someone who wandered in at the end receives the same welcome, the same Father, the same eternity. Think of the deathbed conversion that gets everything you have spent 40 years pursuing. Think of the sibling who wrecked the family and came back and got a party. Think of anyone whose road to God cost visibly less than yours did. If some part of you objects, this story is standing at that exact spot with a question: is your eye evil because he is good? And here is the gift hidden inside the offense. If the kingdom worked on merit, then your place in it would depend on your output, and you would never, ever be able to stop calculating whether you had done enough. The same generosity that scandalizes you is the only thing that makes your own standing secure. You did not get a denarius because you earned one. You got one because of who the owner is. Parable 18, the 2 sons, Matthew 21:28-32. A certain man had 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, "Son, go work today in my vineyard." He answered and said, "I will not." But afterward he repented and went. Jesus tells this in the temple courts in the final week of his life to the chief priests and elders who have just demanded to know by what authority he is doing these things. The temperature in this conversation is high, and he answers with a short story about a father and 2 boys. The first son is asked to go work in the vineyard, and he says no, flatly, publicly, disrespectfully. In an honor culture, that refusal in front of witnesses is a serious offense. But afterward the text says he repented himself and went. The second son says, "I go, sir." And the Greek is even more polished than English suggests, a courteous, immediate, respectful reply. And he does not go. Jesus asks, which of the 2 did the will of his Father? There is only one possible answer, and they give it, the first. Then he says the thing that must have landed in that courtyard like a stone through a window. "Verily I say unto you that the publicans and the harlots go into the kingdom of God before you." Sit with how offensive that is to the men he is addressing. These are not corrupt men by their own reckoning. They are the custodians of the nation's religion, the ones who kept the temple functioning, who preserved the law, who said yes to God as a matter of daily vocation. And Jesus tells them that tax collectors and prostitutes are getting in ahead of them, and he tells them why. "John came unto you in the way of righteousness, and ye believed him not, but the publicans and the harlots believed him." The disreputable people said no with their lives for years, and then, when the word came, they changed. The religious people said yes with their mouths continuously and never moved. This parable makes a distinction that comfortable religion has always tried to blur: the difference between agreement and obedience. It is entirely possible to affirm every doctrine, sing every song with feeling, say amen at the right moments, and never once actually go to the vineyard. Verbal assent is cheap, and it feels remarkably like faithfulness from the inside. That is what makes it dangerous. The second son went to bed that night believing he was the good son. He had done nothing wrong that anyone could point to. He had simply not gone, and there is enormous hope in the other direction, which is the reason Jesus told it. The first son's story does not end with his refusal. He repented himself. Literally, he had a change of feeling that turned into a change of route, and he went. Which means that a life that started with a loud no is not disqualified. Some of the most fruitful people in the history of the church began by telling God in one way or another, absolutely not. So the question is not what you said, it is where you are standing. Ask yourself, without any performance, is there something the Father asked of me that I said yes to and never did? A reconciliation, a confession, a giving, a calling I have been affirming in conversation for 3 years while doing nothing about it. That yes will not become obedience by being repeated more sincerely. The vineyard is still there. The day is not over. Go. Part 3. The Cost and the Weight. Parables of Discipleship. Parable 19. The Wise and Foolish Builders. Matthew 7:24-27. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. This is the closing parable of the Sermon on the Mount, and its position matters. Jesus has just spent 3 chapters saying the most demanding things anyone has ever said about anger, lust, revenge, money, worry, and judgment. And he ends not with a summary, but with a warning about what will happen to people who found the sermon beautiful and did nothing with it. 2 men build houses. Jesus gives us no difference between them except one, and it is not in the walls. Read it carefully. Whosoever heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them, both men hear. That is explicit. The foolish builder is not an unbeliever, not someone who rejected the teaching, not someone who never came to church. He heard the same sermon from the same mountain, and presumably agreed with most of it. He simply did not build on it. And here is the thing about foundations that makes this parable so unnerving. In fair weather, the 2 houses look identical. Foundations are invisible. Nobody driving past can see whether there is bedrock or sand under a building. And the man on the sand is not consciously cutting corners. Sand is easier to dig, faster to build on, and in the dry season it holds fine. He may have finished first. His house may have been the more impressive of the 2 for years. Then the storm comes, and it comes to both. That is another detail people miss. Jesus does not say the storm comes to the foolish man as a judgment and spares the wise. The rain, floods, and winds hit both houses in identical terms. Weather is not a moral verdict. The diagnosis and grief and loss and betrayal that arrive in a human life are not evidence about the quality of your faith. They are simply the season. What the storm does is not cause the difference. It reveals it. Now, the practical question. What does it actually mean to build on the rock? Jesus defines it himself, and he does not define it as believing correctly or feeling strongly. He defines it as doing. The doing is the digging. Every time you obey something you would rather not obey, forgive when you would rather nurse it, tell the truth when a lie would be smoother, give when you would rather keep, refuse the second look, hold your tongue, keep the promise that got expensive, you are removing another shovel of sand and setting another course of stone under your life. It is slow. It is unglamorous. It is entirely invisible to everyone around you, and on the day the water comes up, it is the only thing that matters. I want to say something gently here, because for some of you the storm has already come, and the house did not hold. You found out, in the worst season of your life, that what you had was mostly sand, a faith made of good feelings, familiar songs, and untested assumptions. That collapse is a grief. But hear this. In the parable, the man loses his house. He does not lose his life, and there is nothing in Scripture that prevents a person from rebuilding, this time going down through the sand until the shovel strikes something that will not move. Start digging today. The weather is not going to consult you about its schedule. Parable 20, the tower builder and the king going to war, Luke 14:28-33. For which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it? Great crowds are traveling with Jesus. This is the height of his popularity, the moment when any leader who cared about numbers would consolidate the crowd and make joining easy. And Jesus turns around and starts talking about hating your own life, carrying a cross, and forsaking everything you have. Then he tells two short parables about people who did not think things through. A man decides to build a tower, probably a watchtower for a vineyard, a substantial and visible structure. He does not sit down first and count the cost. He lays a foundation and runs out of money. And the picture Jesus draws is not of a business setback, it is of public humiliation. All that behold it begin to mock him, saying, "This man began to build and was not able to finish." An unfinished foundation stands out on the landscape for years. Everyone who passes knows the story. Then a king with 10,000 soldiers faces an enemy coming with 20,000. He sits down, the same phrase, and consults whether he can meet him. If he cannot, he sends an embassy while the other army is still a long way off and asks for terms of peace. Two men, two decisions, one common action, sitting down first. What is Jesus doing here? He's doing the opposite of what religious salesmanship does. He's standing in front of the largest crowd of his ministry and telling them to slow down and think carefully about whether they actually want this, because there is a cost and it will come due. That is a stunning approach to take with a crowd, and it tells you something about the kind of following he was after. He never wanted people who signed up in a wave of enthusiasm and quit when the demand surfaced. He wanted people who walked in with their eyes open. So what is the cost? He states it in the next verse without softening. "Whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple." That does not mean every believer must sell every possession. Elsewhere, Jesus has friends with houses and women who support his ministry out of their means. It means the transfer of ownership is total. Nothing remains categorically off limits. Everything you have is now held on behalf of someone else, subject to being asked for. Now notice the difference between the two parables, because they are not saying the same thing. The tower builder is asked, "Do you have enough to finish?" The king is asked, "Can you win this fight?" And the answer for the king, when the armies are counted honestly, is no, he cannot. His only sane option is to send, while the other is yet a great way off, and sue for peace. That is the second half of the message, and it is the gospel hiding inside a hard saying. When you count the cost honestly, you discover that you do not have sufficient to finish. Nobody does, which leaves you one option. Make peace with the king while there is still distance between you, before the terms are decided by force. Count the cost. Discover you cannot pay it. Surrender to the one who can. That is not a failed calculation, that is the correct one, and it is where every real disciple has always started. Parable 21. The lamp under a bushel. Mark 4:21-25. Is a candle brought to be put under a bushel or under a bed, and not to be set on a candlestick? The question is almost funny, and it is meant to be. Nobody lights a lamp in order to hide it. The absurdity is the argument. Understand what a lamp was in that world. A small clay dish of olive oil with a floating wick, giving off a light roughly equivalent to a single candle. In a one-room house with no windows to speak of, that little flame was the difference between a functioning household and a family sitting in the dark. And a bushel, a modios, a grain measuring basket, placed over it would smother it within moments. Not just conceal it, kill it. So the first thing this parable says is that concealed light does not stay light. A faith kept entirely private does not remain a private faith. It goes out. Now, Jesus is not scolding the naturally reserved here, and it is important to say that clearly, because this text has been used to shame quiet people into performances that are not theirs to give. The image is not a floodlight. It is a household lamp doing ordinary work in an ordinary room. so that the people who live there can see what they are doing. Most Christian witness looks exactly like that. Not a stage, but a kitchen. The way you speak about your employer when the others are complaining. The way you handle being wronged. The patience that people cannot account for. That is the lamp on the stand. Then he says something that widens the frame considerably, for there is nothing hid, which shall not be manifested. Neither was anything kept secret, but that it should come abroad. Everything hidden is on its way to being revealed. That is a promise, and depending on what you are hiding, it is either the best news you have heard all week or a warning. For the person carrying a secret sin, it is a mercy, because it means the exhausting work of concealment has an expiration date, and you would be wiser to bring it into the light yourself, on your terms, with people who love you, than to wait for the light to find it. And for the person whose faithfulness has never been noticed by anybody, who has served for years in a role no one applauds, who has forgiven privately, given anonymously, prayed for people who never knew, it means that nothing done in the dark is lost. It is not unseen. It is simply not yet manifested. Then the closing line, which sounds harsh until you understand it, take heed what ye hear. With what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you, and unto you that hear shall more be given. For he that hath, to him shall be given, and he that hath not, from him shall be taken even that which he hath. That is not a statement about wealth. It is a statement about spiritual attention, and it is simply how capacity works. The person who acts on the light they have receives more light. The person who receives light and does nothing with it slowly loses the ability to perceive it at all. Nobody announces the day they stop being able to hear God. It happens by degrees, under a basket. Take the basket off. Light is not something you own. It is something you were handed to hold up. Parable 22, the salt that lost its savor. Luke 14:34-35, Matthew 5:13. Salt is good, but if the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be seasoned? It is neither fit for the land nor yet for the dunghill, but men cast it out. In the ancient world, salt was not a condiment, it was infrastructure. Without refrigeration, it was the primary means of preserving meat and fish, which meant it was the difference between a family eating in the winter and a family not eating in the winter. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in it, which is where our word salary comes from. When Jesus tells a crowd of peasants that they are the salt of the earth, he is not paying them a poetic compliment. He's telling them they are load-bearing. Salt does three things worth holding on to here. It preserves, slowing decay in whatever it is worked into. It flavors, making bland things worth eating, and it stings because it goes into wounds, and clean water does not. That is a fair description of what the presence of genuine believers does to a society. It slows decay, not by seizing control, but by being present in every ordinary corner of the culture, one person at a time. It gives flavor. There is a distinct quality to a life shaped by grace that others notice and cannot quite name. And it stings, because the same life that is attractive is also, unavoidably, an implicit judgment on the way things are usually done, and some people will resent you for it without being able to say why. But then comes the strange warning: if the salt have lost his savor. Chemically pure sodium chloride cannot lose its saltiness, and people have used that fact to argue that Jesus made a mistake. He did not. The salt available in that region came largely from the Dead Sea and from salt marshes, and it was full of other minerals. Left exposed to moisture, the actual salt content would leach out, leaving a white, salt-looking powder that was chemically inert. It looked exactly like what it had been. It simply no longer did anything. That is the danger the parable names, and it is not the danger of becoming visibly corrupt. It is the danger of remaining visibly religious while quietly ceasing to have any effect on anything. Same vocabulary, same attendance, same appearance, no preserving power, no flavor, nothing that stings, nothing that anyone would miss if it were removed. And Jesus is blunt about the outcome. It is not fit for the land, nor for the dunghill. That is a remarkable phrase because a dunghill will take almost anything. Even the compost heap has no use for it. So what actually causes the leaching? Almost always the same thing. Gradual absorption into the surrounding culture until there is no discernible difference left. Not a decision, a slow soaking. You take on the ambient assumptions about money, about status, about who matters, about what is owed to you. And one day the flavor is gone, and you did not notice it going. The remedy is not to isolate yourself from the world. Salt in the shaker preserves nothing. The remedy is to stay close to the source of your distinctiveness while remaining thoroughly mixed into ordinary life, which is to say, stay near Christ and stay in the world. Lose the first, and you become inert. Lose the second, and you become irrelevant. You were made to be tasted, be salt. Parable 23, New cloth and new wine. Matthew 9:16-17. Neither do men put new wine into old bottles, else the bottles break, and the wine runneth out, and the bottles perish. But they put new wine into new bottles, and both are preserved. John's disciples come and ask Jesus a fair question. Why do we fast often, and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? And rather than defend his followers' spiritual seriousness, Jesus tells two miniature parables about clothing and winemaking. The first, nobody sews a patch of unshrunk cloth onto an old garment. New cloth has not yet been through its first washing, and when it does shrink, it will pull at the weakened fabric around it and tear a hole worse than the original. The repair destroys the thing it was meant to fix. The second, nobody puts new wine into old wineskins. Wine was stored in skins, and fresh wine is still fermenting, still releasing gas, still expanding. A new skin has elasticity and can stretch with it. An old skin has already been stretched to its limit and dried out and gone brittle. Put fermenting wine into it, and the pressure will split it, and you lose both the wine and the container. Now, what is Jesus actually saying? He is saying that what he has brought is not a repair to the existing religious system. It is not an improvement on Pharisaic practice, not a patch on Second Temple Judaism, not a slightly better version of what was already running. It is new wine, and it will not survive being poured into the old forms, and the old forms will not survive the attempt. That is why he would not simply add his teaching to the existing framework of fasting rules. The question was not whether his disciples were disciplined enough. The question was what time it was. He goes on to say it directly. Can the children of the bride chamber mourn while the bridegroom is with them? You do not fast at a wedding. The practice was not wrong, the moment had changed, and the practice had not caught up. Here is where this lands on ordinary lives, and it lands harder than most of us want. God is regularly doing something new in a person's life, and the reason many of us cannot receive it is that we insist on pouring it into the container we have always used. We want the new thing to fit our existing schedule, our existing self-image, our existing understanding of what our life is for. We want transformation that does not require any structural change. And that combination does not work. Something has to give. And Jesus says plainly what will break first. The old wineskin is not evil. Notice that. Wineskins are not villains. They simply lose their capacity to stretch. And the same is true of habits, of routines, of a way of praying, of a way of thinking about ourselves that served us well for years and cannot hold what God is now producing. So ask a hard question. Is there something God is doing in you right now that you keep trying to fit into a life you have already decided cannot change? The wine is not the problem. The skin is. And He is willing to give you a new one if you will stop defending the old. Parable 24, the strong man bound, Matthew 12:29, Mark 3:27. Or else, how can one enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil his house? Jesus has just cast a demon out of a man, and rather than rejoice, his critics accuse him of doing it by the power of Beelzebub, of casting out demons by the prince of demons. He answers first with logic. A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand, and Satan does not dismantle his own operation. And then he answers with this image, which is one of the most militant things he ever said. A strong man is in his house. He has goods, property, possessions, things he holds, and there is only one way to take anything out of that house. You must first bind him. Jesus is describing what he is doing. He is the intruder. This world, in its current condition, has an occupant who holds what does not belong to him, and the ministry of Jesus is not primarily a teaching career with some healings attached. It is a home invasion. Every exorcism, every healing, every act of forgiveness is a piece of property being carried out of a house whose owner has been tied up. And notice the order. Bind first, then plunder. The binding happens before the goods are removed, which means that the decisive victory precedes the visible liberation. This is exactly how the New Testament describes the cross and resurrection. The strong man has already been bound, and what is happening now across centuries is the steady removal of his goods. That order explains something that confuses believers constantly. If Christ has won, why does evil still operate? Because a bound strong man is not an absent one. He is still in the house. He can still be heard. He is still in the imagery capable of a great deal of noise. But he cannot stop the removal of what is being carried out past him, and that is the difference between an enemy who is dangerous and an enemy who is in control. There is a deep pastoral comfort in this for anyone in a genuine spiritual struggle. You are not the one doing the binding. That work is not assigned to you. It has already been accomplished, and no amount of your fear or fatigue reverses it. Your part is simpler and more manageable. Stay near the one who did the binding and let yourself be carried out. And there is a sober warning in it as well. Jesus never treats evil as a metaphor for social dysfunction. He speaks of a real adversary with real intent who genuinely holds what he holds. A generation that has decided this is embarrassing to talk about has not thereby made itself safer. It has only made itself less able to name what is happening to it. The house is being emptied. The rightful owner has come back for what is his. And if you belong to him, then what you are, whatever the strong man may still be shouting about it, is stolen property in the process of being returned. Parable 25, the return of the unclean spirit, Matthew 12:43-45. Then goeth he, and taketh with himself 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter in and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. This is one of the least quoted parables Jesus told, and one of the most necessary, because it addresses a failure mode that sincere people fall into constantly. An unclean spirit goes out of a man. Whatever the deliverance was, it was real. The house is emptied, and then the spirit wanders through dry places seeking rest, finds none, and says, I will return unto my house from whence I came out. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and garnished. Those 3 words are the whole parable: empty, swept, garnished. The house is not just vacant, it has been cleaned and decorated. Somebody put real work into it. This is a life that has been genuinely reformed. The bad habit broken, the destructive relationship ended, the addiction interrupted, the mess cleaned up. From the outside, it looks like a success story, and in a sense it is. But it is empty. Nobody moved in. And so the Spirit takes 7 others, more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state is worse than the first. Jesus is teaching something that every honest pastor and counselor knows, and that almost no one wants to hear. Removal is not the same as filling, and a vacancy will not stay vacant. The human soul is not designed to be empty. It will be occupied by something, which is why so many reformations collapse. The person did all the hard work of sweeping and none of the work of welcoming, and the void that discipline created was eventually filled by something worse than what was thrown out. You see this outside of religion all the time. The man who quits drinking and becomes intolerable to live with. The person who leaves a destructive relationship and replaces it with a compulsion nobody names because it looks productive. The believer who conquers an obvious sin and develops in its place a hard, sour, judgmental spirit toward everyone still struggling, 7 spirits more wicked in a very clean house. So the practical lesson is direct. Do not build your spiritual life primarily around subtraction. Deliverance that stops at removal is unfinished work. What was that habit doing for you? Soothing what? Filling what? Silencing what? And what has taken its place? Because if the honest answer is nothing, you are living in a swept and garnished house with the door unlocked. The gospel's answer is not willpower guarding an empty room. It is occupancy. Christ does not merely take things out of a life. He moves in, and the presence of the Spirit is what makes the house uninhabitable to what used to live there. Fill the space with prayer, with the Word, with real people who know your name, with work that matters, with worship that engages the parts of you that used to be engaged by the thing you gave up. Empty is not the goal. Occupied is. Parable. 26. The unprofitable servants. Luke 17:7-10. So likewise ye, when ye shall have done all those things which are commanded you, say, We are unprofitable servants. We have done that which was our duty to do. This is one of the parables that people quietly wish Jesus had not told, because it says something about our relationship to God that runs directly against a very deep human instinct, the instinct to be owed. The scene is a modest farm. A servant has been out plowing or tending sheep all day. He comes in at evening, and Jesus asks a question that assumes an obvious answer. Will the master say, Come and sit down to eat? Or will he say, Prepare my supper, gird thyself and serve me, and afterward thou shalt eat and drink? In that world the answer was not cruel. It was simply the arrangement. The servant's day did not end when the field work ended. Doth he thank that servant because he did the things that were commanded him? I trow not. And then the application, and it stings. So likewise ye, when ye shall have done all those things which are commanded you, say, We are unprofitable servants. Now, we have to handle this carefully, because a shallow reading turns God into a tyrant who never says thank you. And that reading collides with everything else Jesus said, including his own promise that the master of the returning servants would gird himself and serve them, which is the exact opposite scene told by the same teacher. So what is he actually dismantling? He is dismantling the idea of surplus. He is addressing the calculation running quietly in the back of a religious mind. I have obeyed here, I have given there, I have served for this many years, and therefore a balance has accrued in my favor, and God is now in some measure obligated to me. That instinct is what makes people bitter when life goes badly. Listen to the language of a wounded believer, and you will often hear an invoice. After everything I have done. I served in that church for 20 years. I raised my children in the faith. I gave when I could not afford to. All of it may be true, and none of it creates a debt, because everything commanded was already owed. The word rendered unprofitable does not mean useless or worthless. That would contradict Jesus calling his servants friends and heirs. It means something closer to bringing no surplus, creating no credit. Nothing extra was generated by our compliance that God did not already have a right to. And here is the surprising thing: this is not a crushing doctrine, it is a liberating one, because a person who is not owed anything cannot be cheated. The moment you stop keeping an account with God, an enormous amount of resentment loses its footing. You are free to obey without measuring, to serve without an audience, to give without expecting a corresponding return in comfort or recognition or answered prayer on your schedule. And then, precisely because nothing is owed, everything that does come is understood correctly. The welcome, the sonship, the inheritance, the eventual well done, not payment, gift, which is the only category in which those things could ever have arrived. Do your duty today, expect no invoice, and be astonished for the rest of your life at what you are given anyway. Parable 27, the grain of wheat, John 12-24. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. Some Greeks have come to Jerusalem for the feast and asked to see Jesus. The nations are beginning to arrive, and Jesus responds by saying, "The hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified." And then he immediately defines what he means by glory with an image from a field. A seed has exactly two possible futures. It can be preserved, kept dry and intact and safe in a jar, in which case it remains precisely what it is: one seed, whole, undamaged, and utterly alone. Or it can be buried, where it will split, soften, be consumed, and cease to exist in the form it had, and become the source of a harvest. There is no third option, and note the phrase Jesus attaches to preservation: it abideth alone. The seed that avoids death does not merely fail to multiply, it becomes a permanently solitary thing. That is a description of a life, and it is one of the more haunting things Jesus said. Self-preservation and loneliness are the same road. He is speaking first about himself. He is days away from the cross, and he is telling anyone who will listen that what looks like the catastrophic ending of a movement is in fact the mechanism of its expansion. If he escapes death, he remains one man, admired, remembered, and alone. If he goes into the ground, there will be a harvest so vast that no one can count it. 2,000 years later, on every continent, in every language, the harvest is still coming up out of that one buried seed. But he does not leave it there. The next verse turns it directly on us. He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. That means the pattern is not merely something to admire in Christ. It is the operating principle of any life that will ever bear fruit, and it is not limited to martyrdom. It shows up in 10,000 ordinary burials. The parent who buries a decade of ambition into the raising of children. The person who gives up a plan they loved because someone else's need was larger. The friend who absorbs an offense and does not retaliate, letting the desire for vindication go into the ground unspoken. The believer who tells the truth and loses standing for it. None of those get applause. All of them feel at the time like loss, because they are loss. The seed is not pretending. It really does come apart down there in the dark. And what makes this bearable is the one thing the seed cannot see from underground. The harvest is not visible from the place where the dying happens. It never is. You do not get to watch the fruit while you are the one splitting open, which is why this requires trust rather than evidence. So the question this parable puts to you is not whether you are willing to be admired for your faith. It is whether there is something in your life that God is asking you to put into the ground, and whether you will keep it safe, whole, and alone, or let it go and never see in this life everything that grows. Part 4. Money, time, and the things we quietly trust. Parable 28. The rich fool. Luke 12:16-21. But God said unto him, Thou fool, This night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be, which thou hast provided? A man in the crowd interrupts Jesus with a family problem. Master, speak to my brother, that he divide the inheritance with me. Jesus refuses to arbitrate, and then says something to everyone present. Take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. Then this story, a rich man's land produces an unusually good crop. Notice how the parable begins. The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. The abundance is not attributed to his brilliance. The land did it. It rained. That framing matters because everything the man says afterward proceeds as though he generated it himself, and what he says is worth counting. In 4 verses of internal monologue, he uses the words I and my 11 times. My fruits, my barns, my goods, my soul. There is no one else in this man's mind, no God to thank, no neighbor to consider, no poor person anywhere in the vicinity of his thinking, and there certainly were poor people in the vicinity of his village. He conducts a conversation with himself, and he is the only participant. His plan is not evil by any standard we normally apply. Tear down the old barns, build bigger ones, store the surplus, and then, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. That is a retirement plan. Most of the modern world would call it prudent, and financial advisors would call it a success story. And God calls him a fool. The word is not an insult about intelligence. In the Hebrew scriptures, the fool is the person who has arranged his life as though God were not a factor in it. This man's error is not that he saved, it is that he built a future out of a commodity he did not control and could not extend by 1 hour. This night thy soul shall be required of thee. There is no negotiation, no illness, no warning period, and the question that follows is the sharpest one in the parable. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? Somebody will have his grain. It will not be him. He spent his one life accumulating something that transferred within hours to people he had not even considered. Jesus lands it. So is he that layeth up treasure for himself, and is not rich toward God. That last phrase is the whole cure, and it is not a command to be poor. It is a redirection of the same instinct. Rich toward God, meaning wealth held in a direction rather than in a container. Generosity given while it is still yours to give. Resources deployed toward people and purposes that outlast the barn. The hardest thing about this parable is that the man never sees it coming, and neither does anyone around him. He is not a scoundrel. He is a normal, successful, prosperous person doing what everyone he knows would advise him to do. So ask the uncomfortable question tonight. If your soul were required of you before morning, what would happen to what you have built? And is there anyone, anywhere, who would be glad you existed for reasons that have nothing to do with the size of your barns? Parable 29, the rich man and Lazarus, Luke 16:19-31. And beside all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from thence. This is the only parable in which Jesus gives a character a name, and the name he gives is not to the wealthy man, but to the beggar, Lazarus, which means God has helped. The rich man, who almost certainly had the more famous name in his own city, is nameless here. Jesus has quietly reversed the world's filing system before the story has even begun. The rich man is clothed in purple and fine linen. Purple dye was extraordinarily expensive and fares sumptuously every day. Lazarus is laid at his gate. That phrase matters. Someone carried him there. He's covered with sores, desiring to be fed with the crumbs from the rich man's table, and the dogs come and lick his sores, a detail meant to convey the total absence of human care. Note what the rich man does not do. He does not have Lazarus beaten or removed. He does not mock him. His sin is not cruelty. It is that he walked past a starving man at his own gate every single day and simply did not register him as relevant. And it is worth pausing there, because that is the more common sin by an enormous margin. Most of us will never be cruel. Almost all of us are capable of not seeing. Both men die. Lazarus is carried by angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man is buried, and Jesus notes the burial, which suggests a fine funeral with speeches, and lifts up his eyes in torment. Then comes the detail that reveals him completely. He sees Abraham and Lazarus, and he says, "Send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue." He knows the man's name. He knew it the whole time. He walked past him daily, knew exactly who he was, and still speaks of him now as an errand boy. Death has not changed his internal hierarchy at all. Abraham calls him son and speaks with terrible gentleness and names the gulf that is fixed. And the finality of that is one of the most sobering things in Scripture, a settled condition, with no traffic in either direction. Then the rich man makes his second request, and it is the closest thing to unselfishness he displays. "Send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them." And Abraham's answer is the reason Jesus told the story. "They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. But if one went unto them from the dead, they will repent," the rich man insists. And Abraham replies, "If they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead." Read that sentence again, and remember who is saying it and what is about to happen to him within the week. Jesus is telling a story in which a man says a resurrection would settle the matter, and Jesus knows that his own resurrection, a few days away, will not settle it for people who have already decided not to be moved by what they have. The gate is still the point. Somebody is laid at yours. It may be a person, a family member, a co-worker, a situation you have trained yourself to walk past. Unbelief is rarely a lack of evidence. Usually it is a long habit of not looking. Parable 30, the unjust steward, Luke 16:1-13. And the Lord commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely. For the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. This is widely considered the most difficult parable Jesus told, and the difficulty is not manufactured. On its face, it appears that a dishonest man is praised for a final act of dishonesty. A steward, a household manager with broad authority over an estate, is accused of wasting his master's goods and is told to give an accounting because he is being dismissed. He has a brief window before the dismissal becomes public, and he thinks, "I cannot dig. To beg, I am ashamed." So he calls in his master's debtors and reduces their bills. 100 measures of oil written down to 50, 100 measures of wheat written down to 80, so that when he is out of work, they may receive me into their houses. And the master, on discovering it, commends him. Several things clarify this. First, note precisely what is praised. He had done wisely. It is his shrewdness that is commended, not his ethics. Jesus calls him the unjust steward while telling the story, so no one is under any illusion about his character. Second, the amounts written off may well have been the steward's own commission, a customary markup he was entitled to, in which case he's impoverishing himself to buy future goodwill. Either way, the point stands. What Jesus is highlighting is this: the man grasped his situation with total clarity. He understood that his present position was ending, that a future was coming, and that the only assets that would matter after the transition were relationships. So he took the resources currently under his control, which were never really his, and converted them into something that would still exist on the other side of the change. Then Jesus applies it with a sentence that ought to unsettle every serious believer. The children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. He is saying that worldly people frequently show more intelligence about their goals than religious people show about theirs. They plan, they calculate. They understand that resources are for deploying, not admiring. Meanwhile, people who claim to believe in an eternal kingdom often drift through their financial lives with no strategy whatsoever regarding the one thing they say is real. And so, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. Take the money, the ordinary, unglamorous, morally compromised currency of this world, and spend it in ways that create relationships and outcomes that will still exist when the money does not. Then the summary, and there is no ambiguity in it. No servant can serve two masters. Ye cannot serve God and mammon. Notice he does not say should not, he says cannot. It is not a warning about divided loyalty, it is a statement about impossibility. The steward's genius was that he understood his tenure was temporary and acted accordingly. Do you? You are managing an estate you do not own for a period you did not set, and the accounting is coming. Be at least as shrewd about eternity as that man was about his next address. Parable 31. The Talents. Matthew 25:14-30. His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. A man traveling into a far country calls his servants and delivers to them his goods. To one he gives 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to every man according to his several ability. Then he leaves for a long time. Start with the size of the trust, because the English word talent has drifted so far from its original meaning that we no longer feel it. A talent was a weight of silver equal to roughly 20 years of a laborer's wages. So the servant who received 1 talent, the one we tend to think of as having been given a small, almost insulting amount, was handed 2 decades of income. This is not a story about someone being shortchanged. Every servant in it received a fortune. 2 of them trade with what they were given and double it. The third digs in the earth and hides his Lord's money. And when the master returns, the first 2 hear identical words, and this is one of the most important details in the parable. The man who produced 5 more and the man who produced 2 more receive exactly the same commendation, word for word, and the same reward. There is no scale of comparison between servants. The evaluation is not against each other. It is against what each was given. That should quietly kill a great deal of the envy and inadequacy that Christians carry around. You will not be measured against someone with 5. You will be measured against what was actually placed in your hands. Then the third servant, and his explanation is the psychological heart of the story. Lord, I knew thee that thou art an hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast that is thine. Everything turns on that word, afraid. He did not squander it, he did not steal it. He returned the full amount, intact, exactly as issued. By his own accounting, he has done nothing wrong at all. And the master's response is severe. Why? Because look at what the fear was built on, a false picture of the master. He described a hard, exacting, joyless figure looking for a reason to condemn him. And here is the thing. That description is contradicted by the entire story. This is a master who handed over enormous sums with no instructions and no supervision, who returned praising his servants and inviting them into his joy. The third servant's fear was not a reasonable response to his master's character. It was a response to a master he had invented, and that invented master cost him everything, because fear does not produce caution. It produces burial. It is worth naming plainly how many gifts are in the ground right now for exactly this reason. the person who will not attempt the thing they were made for because they might fail, the believer who will not speak because they might be wrong, the one who will not love again because it went badly last time. Every one of them can say, like the third servant, that they have lost nothing. That is precisely the problem. Notice, too, what the reward for good work turns out to be: more work. Thou hast been faithful over a few things, I will make thee ruler over many. The kingdom's reward for capacity is greater capacity, and then joy. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. Whatever is in your hands right now, it is not yours, and it was not small. Trade with it. Parable 32, the pounds. Luke 19:11-27. And he said unto him, Well, thou good servant, because thou hast been faithful in a very little, have thou authority over 10 cities. This parable resembles the talents, but is not the same story, and the differences carry their own weight. Luke tells us exactly why Jesus told it: because he was nigh to Jerusalem, and because they thought that the kingdom of God should immediately appear. The crowd is expecting the finale. Jesus tells them a story about a long delay. A nobleman goes into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. That detail would have registered immediately with the original audience because it mirrored recent history. Regional rulers really did travel to Rome to have their authority confirmed, and Herod's son Archelaus had done exactly that, with a delegation of citizens following to protest his appointment. Jesus builds that into the parable. His citizens hated him and sent a message after him saying, We will not have this man to reign over us. Before he leaves, he calls 10 servants and gives each of them 1 pound, a mina, about 3 months' wages. Same amount to all. And unlike the talents, he gives an explicit instruction: occupy till I come. That phrase is worth carrying with you. The Greek is a commercial word: do business, trade, put it to work. It is the assignment for the entire interval between his departure and his return. Not survive till I come, not wait till I come. Occupy, hold the position and conduct business in it. When he returns with the kingdom, the accounting begins. One servant has made 10 pounds, another 5, and the rewards are strikingly specific: authority over 10 cities, authority over 5. The reward is not a bonus, it is jurisdiction. The kingdom's economy runs on the principle that faithful stewardship of small things trains a person for actual governance in the age to come. Then the servant who wrapped his pound in a napkin, a small, homely, almost tender detail, as though he had been careful with it, and the same false picture appears. I feared thee, because thou art an austere man. The master answers on his own terms. Out of thine own mouth will I judge thee. If you truly believed I was that kind of man, then all the more reason to have at least put the money in the bank where it would earn something. Here is where this parable is more searching than its sibling. In the talents, the servants were given different amounts. Here, everyone gets exactly the same, which means the variation in results is not attributable to differing gifts at all. Same pound, same instruction, different faithfulness, and that levels the field in a way that is both encouraging and inescapable. Whatever else is unequally distributed in this life, ability, opportunity, health, platform, there is something identical placed in every single believer's hand. The gospel itself, the same spirit, the same commission, the same one life. Nobody gets a smaller portion of that. Occupy till I come. Not until you feel ready, not until circumstances improve. Until he comes. Parable 33, the barren fig tree. Luke 13:6-9. Lord, let it alone this year also, till I shall dig about it and dung it. And if it bear fruit, well, and if not, then after that thou shalt cut it down. Some people have just told Jesus about a horrifying current event. Pilate had murdered worshippers and mingled their blood with their sacrifices. Jesus responds by refusing the assumption underneath the report that the victims must have been worse sinners. Then he says twice, "Except ye repent, ye shall all likewise perish." And he tells this parable. A man has a fig tree planted in his vineyard. Note that placement. Fig trees were sometimes planted among vines, but a fig tree occupies prime, cultivated, irrigated ground, soil that could be growing something. He comes seeking fruit and finds none, and he tells the vine dresser that this has now gone on 3 years. Cut it down. Why cumbereth it the ground? That last phrase is the accusation. The tree is not merely unproductive. It is occupying space and consuming resources that a fruitful plant could be using. Barrenness is never neutral in Scripture. It is always taking something from someone. Then the vine dresser intercedes. "Lord, let it alone this year also." Everything tender in this parable is in that sentence. He does not argue that the tree is fine, or that the owner is being unfair, or that fruit might be there somewhere if you looked harder. He agrees with the diagnosis entirely. He asks only for time, and he attaches to the request a commitment of his own labor, "Till I shall dig about it and dung it," digging around the roots to break up compacted soil, hauling manure. It is filthy, unglamorous, hands-in-the-dirt work performed on a tree that has produced nothing for 3 years and has no claim on anyone's effort. That is a picture of what has been happening to some of you for longer than you know. The seasons of unusual conviction, the book that fell open at the right page, the friend who would not let the conversation stay comfortable, the suffering that broke up ground so hard-packed that nothing had penetrated it in years. That was digging. That was someone at the roots. But hold both halves of this parable, because it is not only mercy. The request is for 1 more year, not for indefinite postponement. And if not, then after that, thou shalt cut it down. The intercession does not remove the deadline, it moves it. Grace is real, and grace is not a guarantee that the window never closes. That combination is exactly why Jesus told this story in a conversation about sudden death. Do not conclude from the fact that nothing has happened to you yet, that nothing was ever going to. Conclude instead that somebody has been asking for more time on your behalf, and use it. The tree in this story is never told the outcome. Neither are we. What we are told is that this year, the soil around your roots is being worked by someone who wants you to live. Bear fruit. Parable 34. The friend at midnight. Luke 11:5-8. I say unto you, though he will not rise and give him, because he is his friend, yet because of his importunity he will rise and give him as many as he needeth. The disciples have just asked Jesus to teach them to pray, and he has given them the Lord's Prayer. Then immediately this, because he knows that the difficulty is not composing the words, the difficulty is continuing to say them when nothing appears to be happening. A man has an unexpected guest arrive at midnight, and he has no bread. In that culture, hospitality was not optional. Failing to feed a traveler was a disgrace that fell on the whole village. So he goes to a friend's house in the middle of the night and knocks. Picture the house he is knocking on. 1 room, the door barred with a wooden beam that scrapes and thuds. The whole family, and probably the animals, asleep on mats on the floor together, and the voice comes back through the door. Trouble me not. The door is now shut, and my children are with me in bed. I cannot rise and give thee. That is a real refusal. It is not a stall. He has said no, and the man outside keeps knocking. Jesus uses a word here, anaideia, that is usually translated importunity or persistence, and it carries a blunter sense, shamelessness. The absence of the social embarrassment that would make a normal person go home. He is willing to look ridiculous, standing in the road at midnight, waking a household because his need is real and his guest is hungry. And Jesus says, though the friend will not rise because of friendship, Yet because of the man's shamelessness, he will rise and give him as many as he needs. Now, this is not a portrait of God as a reluctant sleeper who must be worn down. Jesus is arguing from the lesser to the greater, and he makes it explicit in the next verses. If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your heavenly Father give the Holy Spirit to them that ask him? The logic runs, if shameless persistence works even on an irritated neighbor who does not want to help you, how much more will it be received by a Father who does? Then the famous 3 commands, and in Greek they are continuous. Keep asking, keep seeking, keep knocking. Not one polite request, followed by resignation, which raises the question everyone asks. Why the persistence at all, if God already knows and already loves? Not because he needs convincing, because you do. Something happens in a person during a long asking that could not happen in an instant answer. Desires get sifted, casual wishes fall away, and what is genuinely needed remains. You find out what you actually believe about him. The disciple who has knocked for years is not the same person who first started knocking, and much of what God intends to give is given in the knocking itself. And notice, finally, why the man is asking. Not for himself. He does not need the bread. His guest does. Some of the most persistent praying you will ever do is at somebody else's door for somebody else's hunger. Keep knocking. Parable 35. The persistent widow. Luke 18:1-8. And shall not God avenge his own elect, which cry day and night unto him, though he bear long with them? Luke does something unusual here. He tells us the point before the story starts. He spake a parable unto them to this end, that men ought always to pray and not to faint. Those are the 2 options. Pray or lose heart. There is no third condition where a person stops praying about something and remains entirely well concerning it. The story, a judge who feared not God, neither regarded man. That is a devastating character sketch in 9 words. No vertical accountability and no horizontal shame. He is beyond both religion and reputation, which in that society meant he was untouchable and knew it. And a widow. In the ancient world, a widow without a son was among the most defenseless people alive. No legal standing to speak of, no income, no advocate. She has an adversary, and she wants justice, and she has no bribe to offer and no influential relative to call. All she has is her voice and her willingness to use it. So she comes, and comes, and comes. The judge's internal monologue is the comic center of the parable, and Jesus clearly enjoys it. Though I fear not God, nor regard man, yet because this widow troubleth me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me. The word translated weary is a striking one. It is a boxing term meaning to strike under the eye, to give someone a black eye. He is saying, in effect, this woman is going to wear me down in public. She is beating me up by attrition. He does the right thing for entirely self-interested reasons. And then Jesus makes the comparison, and it is deliberately unequal. Hear what the unjust judge saith, and shall not God avenge his own elect, which cry day and night unto him? The argument is not that God is like the judge, it is that God is the exact opposite of the judge in every particular. The judge has no love for the widow. God calls those who cry to him his own elect. The judge acts to get rid of her. God bears long with them, which means he stays. If persistence extracts justice from a man like that, what will it find in a father like this? But then, at the end, Jesus says something that turns the parable back around on us. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on the earth? That is the real risk he is naming. Not that God will fail to answer, that the askers will stop asking. Long delays do something to people. They erode quietly until one day you notice you have stopped bringing that thing to God at all. Not out of a decision, out of fatigue. If you are somewhere in a long asking right now, The prodigal who has not come home, the healing that has not arrived, the injustice that no one has addressed. This parable is not promising you a schedule. It is telling you that the God you are speaking to is not an unjust judge who must be worn down, and that the one thing worth guarding through the delay is your willingness to keep speaking. Do not faint. Keep coming. Parable 36. The places at the table. Luke 14, 7, 11. When thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. Jesus is a guest at a Sabbath dinner in the house of a chief Pharisee, and Luke tells us he had been watching. He marked how they chose out the chief rooms. That is where this parable comes from, not a theory, but a man observing the seating arrangements at a party and reading the whole human condition off them. In that culture, table position was a public statement of rank. The seats nearest the host were the honored ones, and everyone at the meal could see exactly where everyone else had been placed. So the maneuvering was not petty in their eyes. It was how status was negotiated in real time, and Jesus offers what sounds, at first, like practical advice for social climbers. Do not take the best seat because someone more distinguished may arrive and the host will come and say, "Give this man place." And then you begin with shame to take the lowest room. Instead, take the lowest seat, so that the host may come and say, "Friend, go up higher. Then shalt thou have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with thee." Read at that level. This is simply clever. Aim low and get promoted. But Jesus is doing something more subversive, and the final line gives it away. Whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. He is describing a law, not a technique. The universe is arranged so that self-elevation eventually collapses and self-lowering eventually rises, not always on a visible timetable, but reliably. Anyone who has watched a proud person over 30 years has seen the first half of it. Anyone who has watched a quietly faithful person over 30 years has seen the second. And there is a real trap to name here, because it is possible to read this and adopt strategic humility, taking the low seat while watching for the host out of the corner of your eye, waiting to be promoted, feeling wronged if nobody comes. That is just the old game played in reverse, and it is more corrosive than open ambition because it is disguised. The cure is not technique. It is a change in what you are seated at the table for. If you are there to be seen, every seat is a verdict. If you are there because you were invited by grace and are astonished to be in the room at all, the seating chart loses its power over you entirely. And that is exactly what Jesus says next, because the parable does not stop with guests. He turns to the host and says, "When thou makest a dinner, call not thy friends, nor thy brethren, nor thy rich neighbors, lest they also bid thee again, and a recompense be made thee. Instead, call the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and thou shalt be blessed, for they cannot recompense thee." There is the deeper principle. The whole system he is dismantling runs on reciprocity. Invitations extended to people who can return them, kindness aimed at those who can repay. He's asking for something that breaks the circuit, giving that cannot come back. Look at your own table this week, literally, if you have one. Who is at it, and why? And is there anyone you could invite whose only possible return is that you get to be like your father? Part 5. The Return of the King. Parables of Watchfulness. Parable 37. The Great Supper. Luke 14:16-24. Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in hither the poor, and the maimed, and the halt, and the blind. Someone at the table has just said a pious thing. Blessed is he that shall eat bread in the kingdom of God. And Jesus answers with a story about people who were invited to exactly that and did not come. Understand the custom. In that world, a great banquet involved 2 invitations. The first went out well in advance, and guests accepted then. The second was sent when the food was ready. Come, for all things are now ready. So everyone in this story had already said yes. What follows is not a declined invitation. It is a mass withdrawal at the last moment, after the animals have been slaughtered and the food prepared and the expense incurred. And they all, with one consent, began to make excuse. Listen to the three that Jesus records, because they are chosen with care. I have bought a piece of ground, and I must needs go and see it. I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to prove them. I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. Property, work, family, not one of them is a sin. There is no drunkenness here, no crime, no rebellion. These are the ordinary, respectable, load-bearing goods of a decent human life. And every single one of them is being used as a reason to stay away from the table of God. That is the quiet warning at the center of this parable. What keeps most people from God is not wickedness, it is legitimate busyness. It is a life so full of good things that there is no room left for the best one. And because each individual excuse is defensible, the whole pattern never gets examined. Notice also the escalation in tone. The first says, I must needs go. The second says, I go. The third does not even bother with a polite formula. I cannot come. Excuses harden with use. Then the master's response, and it is anger. The parable says so plainly. But watch what he does with it. He does not cancel the feast. He fills it. Go out quickly into the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in the poor, the maimed, the halt, and the blind. These are precisely the people who could never reciprocate an invitation, the ones excluded from polite society's table, and they are brought into a banquet prepared for someone else, and still there is room. So the servant is sent again, go out into the highways and hedges, and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. That word compel has been misused in history to justify terrible things, but in context, it is tenderness. A beggar from the hedges receiving a summons to a nobleman's banquet would assume it was a mistake or a cruel joke. He would need to be taken by the arm and assured that it was real. That is what compelling means here, overcoming the disbelief of people who cannot imagine they are actually wanted. If you are the one who has trouble believing there is a place set for you, that is the group Jesus says the house gets filled with. And if you are the one who accepted long ago and keeps finding that the field, the oxen, and the household have crowded the meal off your calendar, the table is ready now, not later. Now, Parable 38. The wedding feast and the garment. Matthew 22, 1:14. Friend, how camest thou in hither not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. This parable resembles the Great Supper, but Matthew's version is set in the temple during Jesus' final week, aimed at the religious leadership, and the stakes are raised considerably. It is not a householder now, it is a king, and it is not a dinner. It is the marriage of his son. The invited guests refuse to come. The king sends servants again, describing the feast in detail. My oxen and my fatlings are killed, and all things are ready. And this time the response is worse than excuses. They made light of it and went their ways, one to his farm, another to his merchandise. And the remnant took his servants and entreated them spitefully and slew them. That is a startling escalation, and it is not fiction. Jesus is telling this to men who stood in a line of leadership that had historically mistreated and killed prophets, and who would, within days, hand him over. The parable is autobiographical. He knows exactly what is coming. The king's response is judgment, and then the same beautiful reversal. Go ye therefore into the highways, and as many as ye shall find, bid to the marriage. And the servants gather all as many as they found, both bad and good, and the wedding was furnished with guests, both bad and good. That phrase should stop you. The people who fill the hall are not vetted. This is grace at its most indiscriminate, and it should thrill anyone who has ever wondered whether their history disqualifies them, and then the ending that has troubled readers for centuries. The king comes in to see the guests and finds a man with no wedding garment. He asks him how he got in, and the man is speechless, and he is bound and cast out. It feels harsh until you understand what is likely being described. Guests dragged in off the road obviously had no formal clothing, which means that in a royal wedding of this kind, the garments would have been provided at the door by the host. That is the only way this crowd could have been dressed at all, which means the man without a garment did not lack the means to obtain one. He refused what was offered. He walked past the provision and came in on his own terms, in his own clothes, insisting that what he arrived in was good enough. And when questioned, he has nothing to say, not because he is being denied a hearing, but because there is no possible answer. Everyone else in that room is wearing something they did not bring. This is the whole gospel compressed into one uncomfortable image. Entry is free, and entry is not on your terms. The invitation goes to everyone regardless of merit, and it comes with a garment that must be put on, a righteousness that is given, not generated. To be in the hall wearing your own clothes is to have accepted the invitation while rejecting the thing that made you fit to be there. Many are called, but few are chosen. The hall is open tonight. The garment is at the door. Take it. Parable 39, the 10 virgins, Matthew 25, 1-13. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. A first-century wedding did not run on a schedule. The bridegroom came for his bride when the negotiations between the families were complete, and the timing was genuinely uncertain, which is why the bridal party waited, sometimes for a long time, with lamps ready to escort him in when he arrived. 10 young women wait. 5 are described as wise and 5 as foolish, and the difference between them is a single item: oil. That is worth pausing on, because in every other visible respect, these two groups are identical. All 10 are invited. All 10 belong to the wedding party. All 10 have lamps. All 10 go out to meet the bridegroom, which means all 10 expect him to come. And crucially, all 10 sleep. The parable is not about staying awake. The wise ones are asleep too. The failure is not vigilance in the moment. It is preparation beforehand. The bridegroom tarries. At midnight there is a cry, "Behold, the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him." And in the scramble, the difference finally becomes visible. The foolish say, "Give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out," and the wise refuse. That refusal has bothered a lot of readers because it looks selfish and it looks unlike everything else Jesus taught about generosity. But look at what the oil represents in the story's own logic. Whatever it is, it cannot be transferred at midnight. That is the point of the refusal. There are things in the spiritual life that simply cannot be borrowed in the moment of crisis. You can borrow a car. You cannot borrow someone else's relationship with God. You cannot borrow the years of prayer another person has put in, or the depth their suffering purchased, or the knowledge of Scripture they built quietly over decades. When the midnight cry comes, every person has what they have. A parent's faith will not cover a child. A spouse's devotion will not stand in. This is not cruelty. It is simply the nature of the thing. So the foolish go to buy, and while they are gone, the bridegroom arrives, and the ones who are ready go in, and the door is shut. Then the most chilling exchange in the parables. They come back and cry, "Lord, Lord, open to us." And he answers, "Verily I say unto you, I know you not." Jesus says almost the same words elsewhere to people who prophesied and cast out demons in his name. What he requires is not activity in his name. It is knowing and being known, the private, unglamorous, unwitnessed accumulation of a real relationship, which is exactly what oil is in this story, something bought in advance, quietly, at your own cost, and carried with you. And the delay is not incidental to the parable. It is the test. Anyone can look prepared at the start. The bridegroom tarried, and only then did it emerge who had brought enough for a long wait. Watch therefore, Jesus concludes, for ye know neither the day nor the hour. Which means the only sane strategy is to be the kind of person who is ready at any hour, and that is not built at midnight. It is built now, in the ordinary evening, while there is still oil to be had. Parable 40, the watchful servants, Luke 12:35-40. Blessed are those servants, whom the Lord when he cometh shall find watching. Verily I say unto you, that he shall gird himself and make them to sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve them. Let your loins be girded about and your lights burning. Two images, both practical. Girding meant gathering the long outer robe up into the belt so you could move quickly, the ancient equivalent of having your shoes on. And lights burning meant the household was awake, and the master would find an open, lit house rather than a dark one. The scene, a master has gone to a wedding and no one knows when he will return because wedding celebrations ran for days. The servant's assignment is simply to be ready to open the door immediately when he knocks. And then Jesus says something so unexpected that if any other teacher had said it, it would have been dismissed as nonsense. The master comes home and finds his servants watching, and he girds himself, pulls up his own robe, takes the posture of a servant, and makes them sit down to eat, and comes forth and serves them. Nothing in the ancient world worked like this. Not one person listening had ever seen a master do that or heard of it happening. It is a total inversion of the social order, and Jesus states it as a promise. This is what he intends to do for those who are found waiting. And of course, within about 2 years, he did exactly this in an upper room, wrapping a towel around himself and washing the feet of the men who would abandon him before morning. The parable was not a metaphor. It was an announcement that transforms what watchfulness actually means. If you believe you are waiting for an exacting inspector, your vigilance will be anxious, and anxiety eventually exhausts itself and goes to bed. If you believe you are waiting for someone who is coming home to serve you, waiting becomes something else entirely, closer to a child listening for a car in the driveway than a worker fearing an audit. Jesus adds a second image with a different temperature. If the goodman of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched. Be ye therefore ready also, for the Son of Man cometh at an hour when ye think not. Both pictures are needed. The returning master gives us the affection. The thief in the night gives us the seriousness. Grace without urgency turns into presumption. Urgency without grace turns into fear. He offers both in the same breath, and notice the middle of the passage. Whether he come in the second watch or come in the third watch, and find them so, blessed are those servants. The second and third watches are the dead hours, roughly 9 at night to 3 in the morning, the hardest stretch to stay awake through. He is blessing people specifically for being faithful in the part of the wait when nothing is happening and nobody is watching. Some of you are in the third watch right now. Keep the light on. He is coming, and when he does, he is going to put you at the table and serve you himself. Parable 41, the faithful and wise steward. Luke 12:42-48. But and if that servant say in his heart, My Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to beat the men servants and maidens, and to eat and drink, and to be drunken? Peter has just asked a question. Lord, speakest thou this parable unto us, or even to all? And Jesus answers with another parable rather than a yes or no, which is his way of saying that the answer depends on what a person does with what they have been given. A master puts one servant in charge of the household with a specific job, to give the others their portion of food in due season. That is the assignment, not to rule them, to feed them on time. And blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing, with a promotion attached. He will make him ruler over all that he hath. Then the dark turn. Suppose that servant says in his heart, "My Lord delayeth his coming." Note where it starts. In his heart, not in his behavior yet, in a private conclusion drawn during a long silence. He has taken the delay and turned it into a theory. The accounting is far off, and functionally, therefore, it is not real. And watch what that theory produces in order. First, he begins to beat the men servants and maidens, the very people he was appointed to feed. Authority given for service gets converted into authority used for domination. Then he begins to eat and drink and be drunken. The resources entrusted for the household's provision get consumed on himself. That is the anatomy of nearly every abuse of spiritual or institutional power that has ever occurred, and Jesus diagrammed it in 2 sentences. The Lord returns in a day when he looketh not for him, and the judgment is severe. Then Jesus says something that has enormous implications and gets very little attention. That servant, which knew his Lord's will, and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. But he that knew not, and did commit things worthy of stripes, shall be beaten with few stripes. There are degrees. Judgment is not a single undifferentiated verdict. It is calibrated to knowledge. And that should land with real weight on anyone who has spent a lifetime in churches, who has heard thousands of sermons, who owns multiple translations of the Bible and can navigate them, who is listening to a long teaching on the parables right now. Every hour of instruction you receive raises the standard you will be measured against. That is not a reason to stop learning. It is a reason to make sure that learning keeps turning into doing. And then the sentence that summarizes the whole ethic of the kingdom. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required. Whatever you have, education, security, health, influence, a stable family, a free country, the ability to read, the leisure to study, is a portion placed in your hands so that you can feed the household in due season. It was never a private allocation. The test in this parable is not what you do when the master is in the room. It is what you do in the long stretch when he appears to be delaying and no one is checking. And you could reasonably conclude that it does not matter much either way. Feed the household. He is not delayed. Parable 42, the wicked husbandman. Matthew 21:33-46. But last of all, he sent unto them his son, saying, They will reverence my son. But when the husbandmen saw the son, they said among themselves, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and let us seize on his inheritance. Of all the parables, this is the one that most directly forced the crisis, and Matthew tells us so at the end. When the chief priests and Pharisees had heard his parables, they perceived that he spake of them. They understood it perfectly. That is why they moved against him. A landowner plants a vineyard, and Jesus describes the work in detail. He hedged it round about, digged a winepress, built a tower. Every listener would have recognized those words instantly because they come almost verbatim from Isaiah's Song of the Vineyard, where the vineyard is Israel and the owner is God. Jesus is not inventing an image. He is picking up a text everyone in the courtyard had memorized and continuing it. The owner lets it out to tenant farmers and travels abroad. At harvest, he sends servants to receive the fruit. The tenants beat one, kill another, and stone a third. He sends more, and they do the same. This is the history of the prophets, told to the descendants of the people who received them in the temple, out loud. And then, last of all, he sent unto them his son. Sit with the sheer risk of that. The owner has watched every messenger be assaulted, and he sends his son anyway, saying, They will reverence my son. That is either naivety or something far deeper. A determination to keep offering relationship long past the point where the evidence justifies it. Anyone who has ever wondered whether God gives up too easily has this parable to reckon with. He gives up far too late by any sane accounting. The tenant's reasoning is the most revealing line in the story. This is the heir. "Come, let us kill him and let us seize on his inheritance." They do not act out of ignorance. They recognize him. That is precisely why they kill him, because the son's presence means the owner's claim is being pressed, and they want the vineyard for themselves. That is what sin is at its root, and this parable exposes it more clearly than any moral catalogue could. Not merely breaking rules, wanting the vineyard without the owner, enjoying the gift while eliminating any claim the giver might have on it. Then Jesus asks them to render the verdict themselves. What will the owner do to those husbandmen? And they pronounce their own judgment. He will miserably destroy those wicked men and let out his vineyard to other husbandmen. They have condemned themselves before they realize what they are saying, exactly as David did in front of Nathan. And Jesus quotes the psalm, "The stone which the builders rejected, the same is become the head of the corner." He knows he is about to be rejected by the professional builders. He also knows what he is going to become. The vineyard is still let out. It is in the hands of tenants right now, and the fruit is still expected in season. The question this parable puts to every generation of religious people, including ours, is whether we have quietly begun to regard what was entrusted to us as ours, our church, our ministry, our position, our reputation, and whether we would recognize the owner's son if he showed up asking for fruit. Parable 43, the sheep and the goats. Matthew 25, 31-46. "Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." This is the last parable Jesus tells in Matthew before the Passion narrative begins, and it is less a story than a scene. The Son of Man coming in his glory, all nations gathered before him, and a separation as ordinary as a shepherd dividing sheep from goats at the end of a day. The two mingled all afternoon in the same field, and separated in the evening because they need different things at night. And then the criterion, and it is not what any religious system would have predicted. He does not ask about doctrinal precision. He does not ask about attendance, or spiritual experiences, or public ministry. He recites a list of astonishingly ordinary actions. "I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me." Food, water, welcome, clothing, presence in sickness, presence in prison. 6 things, and not one of them requires giftedness or wealth or a platform. Any human being with a little time and a little attention can do all 6. Now, the most important thing in the entire scene is the reaction of both groups, because it is identical. Neither of them knew. The righteous are genuinely bewildered. "Lord, when saw we thee an hungered and fed thee?" They are not being modest. They have no memory of serving Christ, because at the time it looked like nothing more than a neighbor with no groceries, and an afternoon they gave away. And the others are equally surprised. "When saw we thee, and did not minister unto thee?" They are not confessing negligence. They are protesting that they never saw him at all, which is precisely the charge. That mutual surprise is the theological heart of this parable. Real love does not keep a ledger of its own good deeds, and real neglect does not experience itself as cruelty. Both groups discover the meaning of their own lives at the judgment. And then the sentence that has driven Christian care for the poor for 2,000 years. "Inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." Christ locates himself in the hungry, the imprisoned, the sick, the stranger. Not as a figure of speech. He says, "Ye have done it unto me," which means that every act of care aimed at a person the world considers negligible is received personally by the King of the universe, and every dismissal of such a person is likewise received personally. Understand what this parable is not saying. It is not teaching that you earn heaven by charity work, and the surprise of the righteous rules that out. People who thought they were purchasing something would have remembered the transactions. It is teaching that a life genuinely transformed by grace produces a particular kind of person, someone who notices and who moves toward need without calculating what it buys. So the question is not whether you have a theology of the poor. It is whether when you next encounter one of the least of these, you will see him. Because on that day, according to Jesus, it will turn out that you were seeing him all along. Parable 44. The Good Shepherd and the Door. John 10:1-18. I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. John does not use the word parable in the usual sense here. He calls it a paroimia, a figure of speech, an extended image. And Jesus works two related pictures at once. The door and the shepherd start with the sheepfold. At night, village flocks were often brought into a common enclosure, a stone wall with one opening. The shepherd would lie down across that opening and sleep there. His body was the door. Nothing entered or left except over him. When Jesus says, I am the door, every listener could picture a man lying in a gap in a wall all night with his flock behind him. He that entereth not by the door, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. There is a real exclusivity in this image, and it is worth being honest about it rather than softening it. He presents himself as the single point of access. But notice the tone in which he says it. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. The door is not a barrier being defended. It is an opening being offered, and it is open to any man. Then the shepherd, and John gives us the contrast that defines it. The hireling. The hireling is not a monster, he is simply an employee. And when he seeth the wolf coming, he leaveth the sheep and fleeth. He does not stay, because the sheep are not his. The relationship is contractual, and contracts do not survive wolves. Against that, the good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep, not risks, gives. And he says it 4 separate times in this passage, in increasingly explicit terms, culminating in something no shepherd could ever say. I lay it down of myself. No man taketh it from me. He is telling them in advance that what is coming is not a defeat, but a decision. And in between the two, the most personal line in the passage, I am the good shepherd, and know my sheep, and am known of mine. The word for know here is the deep one. Relational, experiential, the same verb used for God's knowledge of his own. He calleth his own sheep by name. In a common fold where several flocks were mixed together, separation happened by voice. The shepherd walked out calling, and his own sheep, and only his own, came. That is a picture worth carrying. You are not saved into a herd. You are called out by name, from a crowd, by a voice you have learned to recognize over time, and the recognition goes both ways. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. Then the line that quietly widens everything. Other sheep I have which are not of this fold, them also I must bring. That is us, the ones outside the original fold, brought in by the same shepherd, so that there shall be one fold and one shepherd. If you have been listening for a voice in a noisy world and wondering whether you would recognize it, here is the comfort of this passage. The burden of the relationship does not rest on your ability to identify him. It rests on his commitment to call you by name until you do. Parable 45. The true vine. John 15:1-8. I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit, for without me ye can do nothing. We end where the parables end, in an upper room or on the road to Gethsemane, hours before the arrest, with Jesus giving his friends one last image to hold on to for the rest of their lives. A vineyard, a vine dresser, and branches. And the first thing to notice is what is missing from the list. There is no place in this picture for an independent plant. A branch is not a smaller version of the vine, it is an extension of it, and it has no life of its own whatsoever. Cut it off, and it does not decline gradually into a lesser fruitfulness. It dies. That is the meaning of the sentence at the center. Without me ye can do nothing, not less, nothing. The vine dresser does two things, and the Greek makes a word play that English struggles to hold. Every branch that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. And every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. The word for purge is the word for cleaning or pruning, cutting back healthy growth precisely because it is healthy. That is the detail that reframes suffering for anyone who has been fruitful and then found their life suddenly cut back. Pruning is not punishment, and it is not applied to dead wood. Dead wood gets removed, living wood gets cut. Any vine dresser will tell you that an unpruned vine produces a massive foliage and very little fruit, because the plant's energy is spread across everything it is carrying. The cutting is what concentrates it. So if this season of your life has involved losing things you thought were part of your fruitfulness, a role, a capacity, a relationship, a strength you relied on, it is worth asking whether what happened to you was subtraction or concentration. Then the word that governs the whole passage, repeated 10 times in 7 verses, abide. It is not a word about effort. It means to remain, to stay, to make your home somewhere. Jesus does not tell the branches to produce. He never once commands fruit. He commands remaining and promises that fruit follows. That should take an enormous weight off anyone who has been trying to manufacture spiritual results by force. You have never in your life seen a branch straining. It hangs there, connected, and grapes appear on it. And the grapes are not for the branch. No branch has ever eaten its own fruit. Whatever grows on you is going to feed somebody else, which is exactly why the pressure to produce is not yours to carry. And what does abiding look like in practice? He tells us in the same breath, if ye abide in me, and my words abide in you. Staying near him and letting his words stay in you, not visited occasionally, but resident, living in the house, present in your thinking at 2 in the morning. Herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit. That is the last image Jesus leaves us, and it is the perfect place to end 45 stories, because every parable we have walked through today, the seed, the leaven, the treasure, the lost sheep, the prodigal, the talents, the oil, the vine, has been saying one thing in 45 different ways. This kingdom is not something you achieve. It is something you are joined to, and then it grows. Stay joined. The fruit will come. Closing. Reflection. The world you will walk back into 45 stories. We began by noticing what a strange number that is. Strange not because it is large, but because of what it contains. Not 45 descriptions of heaven, not 45 explanations of the mechanics of eternity. 45 stories about seed and bread and coins and wages and weddings and roads and vineyards and lamps, and a father standing at the end of a driveway looking down a road he has been watching for years. And now that we have walked all the way through them, the reason for that is impossible to miss. Jesus did not come to give people a religion to escape into. He came to reveal that the world they were already standing in belonged to God, that the kingdom was pressing in at every point, and that the door into it was almost always somewhere in the ordinary. A farmer's field, a kitchen, a pile of dirty laundry at the bottom of a hill in Samaria, a dinner table with a seating chart, a ledger with 100 pence on it. He told stories about the exact material of everybody's Tuesday, and he told them because that is where he intends to meet you. So let me say plainly what happens now, because it is the only thing this study was ever for. You are going to close this video, and you are going to walk back into a life with a specific shape to it. There is soil in it, hard places, thin places, thorny places, and good ground. There is seed being sown into it, whether you notice or not. There is a strong man who has already been bound and is still shouting. There is somebody lying at your gate. There is a talent in your hand that is worth 20 years of wages and feels like nothing. There is oil to be bought while the shops are still open. There is a pound to be traded with, and an instruction attached to it, occupy till I come. There is a branch, and it is you. And there is a vine, and it is him. And everything that will ever grow on your life will grow because you stayed connected, and not because you strained. And there is a Father. That is the thing I most want you to take with you, because it is the answer the parables give to the question underneath all the other questions. What is God actually like? Jesus was asked that in 100 forms, and he answered it with stories, and the answer was consistent every time. He is a shepherd who counts to 99 and goes out into the dark. He is a woman on her knees with a lamp, sweeping the same floor again. He's a landowner who pays the 5 o'clock workers a full day's wage and asks why your eye is evil, because he is good. He is a king who forgives 10,000 talents in a single sentence. He is a vine dresser who asks for 1 more year and offers to do the digging himself. He is a master who comes home, finds his servants awake, and impossibly, scandalously, puts on the apron and serves them. And he is a father who saw his son a great way off and ran. If nothing else survives these hours in your memory, let it be that. He ran. He absorbed the shame that belonged to somebody else. He interrupted the apology. He called for the robe and the ring and the shoes and the calf, and he went out a second time into the field in the dark to plead with the son who never left and never understood him either. That is who has been speaking to you today through 45 stories across 2,000 years, and these stories are not finished with you. That is the nature of a parable. You can return to any one of them tomorrow and find something that was not there today. You can come back to them in 10 years, standing in a different part of your life, and find that the story you thought you had exhausted is speaking to a wound you did not have when you first heard it. You can come back to them in the worst night you will ever live through and find them still lit from within, still speaking with the full authority of the one who first told them beside a lake. So, do not let this be information that passed through you. Take one of them, just one, whichever one would not leave you alone while you were listening, and stay with it this week. Read it in your own Bible, pray it back to God, ask Him what He means by it in your particular life. Let the seed go into the ground and stay there long enough to become something, because He is still telling stories. And the field He is telling them in is your ordinary, unremarkable, entirely sacred life. Before you go, I have one thing to ask of you, and it is not for me. Share this video with one person. I want you to think of someone specific, and I suspect that while you were listening, someone already came to mind, maybe more than once. The friend who is standing in a marketplace right now feeling like nobody hired them. The brother or sister who is in the far country and has not called. The one who is exhausted from building a house and has begun to suspect it was sand. The person who has been knocking at midnight for years and is close to stopping. The one lying at somebody's gate. Send it to them. That is all. You do not need to write an explanation or attach a sermon or make it a whole conversation. Just send it and let the words of Jesus do what only the words of Jesus can do. Somebody once stopped on a road for you, poured in oil and wine, and paid for a room you could not pay for. This is how that gets passed along. It costs you nothing but the 30 seconds it takes to press send, and for the person on the other end, it might turn out to be the hour their life changed direction. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, I would love it if you would. It is free, it is one tap, and it means the next teaching finds you instead of getting lost in the noise. One last thing, I would love to hear which one landed. Out of these 45 stories, there was probably one line, one verse, one moment that went in deeper than the rest. The one that felt like it had been written for the exact situation you are in right now. Put it in the comments, just the story, or the line, or the verse. Because when you write it down, somebody else scrolling through is going to read your words and realize they needed that one too, and did not know it until they saw it in your handwriting. And now, may the God who told these stories tell them again in your life. May the sower find good ground in you, soil broken open, cleared of thorns, deep enough to hold what he is planting. May you find the treasure in the field you are already standing in, and may you sell everything for joy. May you be found watching in the third watch of the night, with your lamp burning and oil to spare. May you hear your own name in the voice of the Good Shepherd and follow it. And when you have wandered, because you will, and so will everyone listening to this, may you look up and see him already running toward you, while you are yet a great way off. You are not a servant in his house. You are a son. You are a daughter. The robe is ready, the ring is ready, and the table has been set for you since before the foundation of the world. God bless you. Go in his peace and come home.